What's good, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Outside the Clutch. We've been rolling. I really appreciate all the support you guys have been giving. It's freaking amazing. Want to give it a little bit. I'm super excited about this guest, man. Like, this is one of the guys that I met my very first year. I met him at a Pomona show, and we don't talk as often as I'd like to, but he has a different view of things in the industry, and he's not really afraid to speak his mind. So I'm super excited about what's going to come out. We're going to be talking about species that we don't always talk about on this show. As you guys know, this is usually kind of like a ball python show, just because that's our main focus here. But we're branching out a little bit. We're going to be trying a couple of different species, and he works one of them. So I'm super excited to talk about that species tonight. As always, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. Here at Outside the Clutch, we're honored to be sponsored by VivTech. Are you ready for innovation? Tired of the same boring product that's been used for 30 years? Ready to give your reptiles and amphibians the UVB they really deserve? Then look no farther than VivTech. Their 3-watt LED bulb provide the UV rays your animals have been missing. With 3 bulbs to fit your pet's climate needs for optimal husbandry, plus a dimmable feature, and it's the only bulb with a 2-year warranty in the industry. So what are you waiting for? Go to vivtechproducts.com today, use code FCLUTCH0322 for 10% off to provide your animals the best care they've ever had. All right, so I'm not going to make him wait much more. I want to say thank you to everyone that's here. The early people, Mindy, Tom, love y'all. Really hope Otto's doing well. Eric's Morph Factory, what's up? We see you. British Columbia balls. I like talking about stuff besides balls too. Balls are kind of gross, man.
That's good.
Without further ado, here's my dude, my man, Mr. William Filipek. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited that you are here, man. Like, I feel like we take a lot of time away from talking to each other, but every time we come back together, it's almost like we didn't miss a beat. So
Oh
I
yeah.
really appreciate you being a guest, man.
Oh man, I have to apologize too because all the times we've ever met, you've always caught me at the worst times. Because what was it? The last time we met in Arlington, you couldn't. I don't know if you could tell, but I was
You were
like,
done for the
I
day.
was pretty.
Yeah.
Well, I was pretty pissed because me, Dave, and Chad were all supposed to go out to eat, but we went through the lobby. Dave saw all you guys at the lobby, fucking beelined all of you guys. I was cool with the talking, but he wouldn't stop. I said, dude, it's 10 o'clock. I don't know what all is going to be open. We had to go to Whataburger or something because we were supposed to get
Nice.
sushi, and I was like, well, I guess we're getting burgers. So I was like, same thing with MJ too. MJ saw me there too. It was the first time he ever met me, and I don't want to say salty, but I just wasn't as talkative.
Right.
But, like he was doing shots of Patron. I told him, I go, man, I would have drinking that whole bottle if I had something in my system. But I know better, and I was like, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to wait till I eat because I want to try to wake up tomorrow, or the next day. But yeah, so I just had
And
to preference by saying I'm usually more talkative at reptile shows. I think all the times you caught me were just really shitty times that I
no,
did
so
not get to eat.
our first go, bro, was at
I remember
Pomona.
Pomona.
Pomona of
Yeah,
19. And it was
yeah,
right before I did that interview with Megan.
Megan. Yeah,
And I was hanging out waiting for her to get free, and we started talking about ball pythons, of course.
yeah, yep,
And then I was looking at your Morelia and stuff, and because you were, I think it was you, Dave, and Megan all at one booth at that show.
yep.
But we hung out for a while there, and then we did the Megan thing, and then you and me, I forget what we were talking
Do
about, but
do we ever hang out after the show?
we never get the chance, dude. Like, every time
Because
we go after a show and I see you, your
it
hunger
got
cravings are in.
it got it got crazy at Pomona. I miss Pomona. I don't know. It's something about California. Like, I don't know, that show had such a different vibe than all the other reptile shows. Because I've been to Daytona, Arlington, Tinley, and Pomona, and something about California is just different. I don't know if it's
It's
the
a party.
people.
It's not a
Oh, it's the people too. I don't know. They're just more inviting, I guess, and more. I don't know. There's something about it. Just the people there. I feel are better. I don't
well,
know.
I can understand that. I
But it.
love it. Like that's where I started, and I think that's what got me hooked on the shows, man. Like just the
Yeah.
way that the super shows are ran. Rami does an amazing freaking job. Everyone's friendly out there. Like, and it feels like it's a party. Like I don't think there's been a time where I came home where my wife didn't have to drive at least a little bit of
Oh
the
yeah.
way
Right.
because I was not in a position to drive 12 hours.
Yeah. I've never got it. I went to a show where I had such little sleep. I mean, I don't even know why we went back to the hotel that we were staying at. We should have just stayed at the hotel near Pomona where we were hanging out at. Because I mean, we didn't. We slept for an hour, had to wake up, drive right back to it. I go, why did we even come back?
So let's jump into it a little bit, bro. What got you into this industry?
Oh man. So I've always been an animal guy. I've always had a fascination with all animals. You know, probably more so with big cats. I was really into the big cat, uh, all those species, like the leopard in particular. I was always into like the leopards and stuff like that. And
You
I
almost
don't.
became a Tiger King apprentice or what?
Nah, I don't know. It's weird. I never had a desire to really keep that stuff, but I'm at the point now where I'd like to go see that stuff, like actually go to Africa, India, or somewhere to go actually see these animals in the wild, but never to really own it. I don't know, just too much work it looks like, and real, a lot of risk if you're not careful too. But anyways, then it was probably 97, 98. I remember watching Steve Irwin catching a Parenti monitor out in the desert, like chasing this thing down. And that hooked me on that, like really drove my animal interest probably the hardest out of any zoo I've been to or anything like nature or whatever. That one incident really drove me into like I remember that one, from the childhood that really stuck with me. And then something else, the kind of funny, literally 10 years later or 10 years after that. So '07, it might have been even '08, I'm not sure, but Barcheck came out with his snake bite stuff, his shows, or just started doing them. And then that's when I was like, man, the reptile industry looks really interesting. Like, I don't know, like Steve, I don't know, I was interested in reptiles, but Brian, I would say, really propelled me into like I guess showed me the industry, I guess,
Right.
and I was enthralled with it. And then shortly after that, I started going to local shows here in St. Louis, Missouri, and anyone, especially back then, probably our biggest breeder at the time was Ben Rennick, and I talked to Ben. He we would talk every so often. We didn't really talk all that often, but we would talk a little bit here and there. And I think it was maybe a few years after I met Ben. I don't know what it was. I was just like, if you could ever use help or anything out in your building, I'd be willing to come out there. Not even for money. I would just get paid in snakes. Just honestly, at the time, he offered paying me in snakes. I didn't even know that was a thing. I told him I would just come out there and clean shit regardless. Like it didn't matter to me if you gave me anything. Just the knowledge I would learn from doing that, the
Right.
experience I would get was worth more than probably anything I could have gotten from him.
I
So
think that's one of the cool things too, though, man. Is like that's the way a lot of us got our start altogether. Not necessarily with
yeah.
like a Rennick or something, but you work for a store or you find someone that has reptiles and you start working for them or like learning under them, right? And that's usually how you get paid for your time as an
Oh
animal, and
yeah.
that's what really gives you your start, which is I think it's pretty cool, man. Like
Like
it gives you the opportunity to get something you probably wouldn't have been able to get before.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Like, well, and it kind of, I don't know, a breeder definitely, but when you start working for him, like I was very jaded, I guess, and I think most people are when you kind of just when you look at the industry, like with like snake bites, they're not going to show you all the behind the scenes, like what really happens,
Right.
but you kind of you look at it and you're like, oh, that's so awesome, and then you get to know a breeder. I'm not saying, I mean, a breeder could be a shitbag too, but like with Ben or something, I got to see how everybody else was. Like I can tell you what, I my views have changed on a lot of breeders because of working with Ben. You know, not some in good ways, some maybe not so good ways, but generally it was just like it's just aspects of stuff you didn't think about or never thought of till you start working with a big breeder. Then you kind of see at least big breeders as far as like you're more, I guess in this case, an apprentice kind of, where you're actually
Right.
more involved than like an employee who just clocks in and out and doesn't really care about what's going on with the actual
Where it's
industry
more, yeah,
itself.
it's more driven
You
to
know,
help you succeed and to like teach
yeah.
you. Yeah, hell yeah.
But I learned a well that and have been having the reputation he had. You got to see like a lot of what goes on in the industry, and I got a lot of experience too because honestly, like in business ethics and stuff, you know, because Ben was, you know, at the time, I think this is going to blow people's mind, but at the time, I mean, Ben was above Justin at one point. You know, I mean, I'm not maybe not huge gap between the two. I mean, they were either neck and neck, or even Ben might have been a little bit above. But I mean, at one point, Ben was right there. They were even close in the same age, came up around the same time. You know, went two different routes though. That was always interesting, is kind of see how, you know, and me and Dave still talk about that today, is like how Ben would have done in this day of age, because his mindset in the industry was totally different than Justin's. Ben always wanted to be, I remember years ago they used to talk about this tier system in the reptile industry. There was tier 3, 2, and 1. And if I'm not mistaken, tier 3 was more like us, you know, the smaller breeders who still have a day job. Tier 2 is someone like Bob Vu or Just, I think Justin would still fit in there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he would, because then tier 1 was like gourmet rodents and
Like
you
your
know, the
wholesalers
bells,
and
like the big, I mean,
yeah.
factory like size companies. I mean, huge. So, and I remember Ben was more interested in being that big production, like the tier 1 guy. And yeah, I'm curious if he would have still kept that mindset as as the industry evolved into what it is right now. So I just find that's always something I like to think about, you know,
Oh, yeah.
because right now, like Dave, I think Dave kind of wants to go into that, you know, real the tier 1 type breeder, which blows my mind. I don't know why people want to go that route. That is a
Right.
lot of work, and a headache.
What do
You know.
you think was the biggest takeaway from that time with him, man?
Oh
Like
boy.
that, like the way that you've taken your collection, or like how you take care of it, or anything like that. Like, what was the biggest takeaway from working under Ben?
All right, so the way I structured my collection was, you know, you kind of, I don't know, like I wanted to be like Ben. I'm not gonna, not that size, but I wanted to be very similar to Ben. So I started mastering all these like different genes or something. It didn't really matter what. I was just like, you know, blackhead, you know, clowns, just a bunch of random stuff. Let because you know something Ben was always known for was like the 6 to 8 gene
Right.
combos. I mean, just the huge, you know, you can't tell what it is almost kind of combos. So, and I was into that too. And I was like, oh, that's super cool. And I kind of, originally I was going that route. And then at some point I kind of was like, I don't know. I don't want to say I really enjoy ball pythons, but there was just something like I couldn't just like Ben. Ben could just keep ball pythons and be satisfied. Like I just couldn't bring myself mentally to just keep ball pythons for. I mean, there was
There's that
tons of
craving.
reasons, craving, and like at the time I would say it was a craving. Now it's a lot more like a purpose behind what I'm doing now. At least in my mind, I look at it as much more of a purpose and even a service that I'm trying to do for the community. But yeah, as far as Ben goes, though, uh, I got a lot of my big snake experience through him. Like before, I don't think I hardly ever I might have messed with a berm one time, like a just an 8 or 9 foot Burmese python, and that was probably the only experience I've ever had with a big snake. Well, when I first started working with Ben, I was primarily cleaning babies and baby tubs. And then at some point, his original big snake cleaner or keeper guy just left. He just he had other things in life going on. He just couldn't do it anymore. Well, Ben, the big snakes take up a lot of time. Like, probably, I don't know, what did Ben probably have? He had maybe 30, 35 big snakes altogether, like adult big snakes. Like everything was an adult that he had down there for the most part. And I mean, that would take, and I'm not even talking cleaning all of them, but that would take almost 6, 7 hours just to do all of them. Just 35 snakes. Granted, most of them are terrible. They were horrendous. Like, I mean, there was only maybe two retics. Maybe two retics I kind of trusted. I actually trusted the anaconda. I trusted the wild caught anacondas probably more than any of the captive bred retics
I was
or the
gonna say
captive
most of
bred
the stuff down
anacondas.
there was like what? It was imports or F1, F2s, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, retic wise, I think the only wild caught animal he had at the time was the original ghost retic was the only wild caught one he had retic wise. Then he had his anacondas. He had the two antares and the one T positive, and he had two other normal just normal wild caught ones, but they were they ended up passing shortly after that because they were old. And then he had a few yellows that ended up passing too, but they, like I said, these are old snake, wild imported snakes. So those are kind of out, but I dealt with a few wild caught ones as far as the big constrictors go. But I mean, yeah, those F1s, man, like those anacondas, the double hets that Megan has are
Mhm.
terrible. Terrible. I've never, and what makes them worse is they're unpredictable. Like at least the retic kind of lets you know that, hey, I'm not dealing with your shit today. Anaconda will stay like a deflated tire until you fuck with it wrong, and then it
Right.
springs on or springs out at you. Like he had these cages where he had these he kept his two double het males in. I mean, these cages, they only were like a foot high, and the anacondas were like 6.5 feet long. And I mean, they were probably 15, 20 pounds roughly. And I had to aim, and they were probably right around my chest level or face level. And you'd have to sling them up there because it was game on. As soon as that door slid open, they were ready to go. They were coming out after you. No, hey, no joke. One of them that I was telling you before, that was the closest. Like I almost got castrated by one of those male anacondas. Like I'll tell you what, it's one of the scariest things I've ever experienced with a constrictor. Is when I had this male, I had him tailed because you couldn't support the middle of their body because you touch the middle of
Right.
their body, they're turning around to get you. So I'd have its tail, and I don't know, some of its head was on the ground, but it was still able to sling around, and it slung around. And when it slung around, it like grazed my cargo shorts. Like, I mean, its mouth wide open, just grazed. I could feel it brush. And it was like one of those immediately chills down your back. You go, wow, that could have been bad.
That could have been a lot worse than what it
That
ended
could have.
up.
I would have hated to have had Ben come down to help me with that too. That would have been a hell of
Damn,
an
man.
experience. But yeah, no. Anyways, with the big snakes though, that's probably the biggest thing. Like as far as experience level goes, that as far as what I've learned. And like I said, business and stuff too. Like I've learned more about other species from other mentors of mine, but Ben showed me a lot more of the business aspect of it. And that's what, I don't know. It's a very interesting, I don't know, like just the way I have my species mentors, and then I had like my, I guess I guess you'd say the business mentors more
Right.
so. And I always, they're very interesting. Like, and then because I'm trying to do something more in the middle, kind of, because I think there's a way that you can keep a bunch of different species and still do it for a living if you wanted to, but you gotta you gotta be you gotta think more out of the box, I guess, if you will. And that's a
Right.
problem. That's a big problem I see in the reptile community. If someone else big hasn't done it, then they don't see a reason to do it.
Well, I think that's what a lot of people fight with, man. Is like everyone, and I'm gonna say it flat out, like everyone wants to copy.
Yeah,
And you hear it from all the guys that have been around for years and years, man. I just saw that the freaking Italian came out, bro.
it drives me nuts. That's exactly what it is. Dude, I'm telling you, you know, I'm going to give a shout out to an individual that I think is not that's going to piss off a bunch of Justin fans, but I think this dude surpasses Justin. Garrett Hartle and what he was able to do with Superdorf retics is more impressive. This is going to drive people nuts to hear me say this, is more impressive than what Justin's done. And the only reason I say that is because Justin already built upon something that was already there. Like, it's a bunch of the new people won't understand if they haven't been in it long enough, but you see the big ball python breeders. Like, there's Justin now. 10 years ago, Brian Barczyk was king of the hill. He was up there. I know one year he made so much money just off 5 snakes.
Hmm.
Like, 5 snakes made
His year.
crazy money. Because I worked with Ben,
Crazy.
and Ben got one of those big, expensive snakes. So I got to see and hear this. So,
What was that? Do you remember what it
the
was?
Sunset,
The
the
sunset?
Sunset Project. And before, and then Barczyk, well, Barczyk was always big, but he didn't truly blow up till that YouTube sensation start
Right.
going, or this YouTube thing start blowing up. But before that, you had Ralph Davis. Ralph Davis was the big guy on campus at that time, and then back in the '90s, it was Pete. Pete was the big guy. Shoot, I don't know if anyone watched Dave Palumbo's videos he did
Mhm.
of Pete back then, but I mean, he was the Justin back in the '90s.
You're talking about Pete Call, right?
Yeah, Pete Call. But yeah, anyways, back to the Garrett thing. But I mean, and it's not to say what Justin hasn't done is impressive. It is impressive, and it takes someone
It's amazing,
with
dude.
some real, skills to be able to take the helm of I don't know if you call it a species like that, like just especially a ball python being such a big part of the industry. But see what Garrett's done. I think. See, this is going to grind people's gears to hear me say this. So I think he's done it in a better way than any Justin, Barczyk, any of the other ball python people have done. And the reason why I'll say that is because he's trying to please the high end market, the people who want to be breeders, and the people who want to be pet keepers. And there's people who'll spend $2,000 on a retic as a pet. I don't know too many ball python people that'll do that for a pet.
Right.
And there's there's something missing there because the ball python industry, it's the pyramid scheme. You got the top dog, the other few tiers, and then you got the pet keepers. Well, the people right above the pet keepers, which are the breeders that produce stuff for pets, they don't care about, like, here's your snake. I mean, keep it in a 40-gallon tank with an astroturf and a log and a ceramic dish, and that's boring. And then the only thing you can make it interesting is if you breed. If you breed, it's the only way it's interesting. But I go, ball pythons are pretty cool species. I mean, I keep 26 different python species, and I could
Holy
tell you there is not a single python that acts like a ball python. Whether you think that's good or not is your opinion, but I could tell you what, I've never seen any other python suck into a ball so fast like an armadillo, like a ball python. I've walked by a tub and heard this loud, like this banging noise. I'm like, what the fuck was that? I pop open the tub and this ball python's in a perfect ball. And I go, that thing sucked into a ball that fast? Like, I mean, it was, I mean, within a
just
snap
because it
of a
realized you were walking
yeah, it
by.
was startled. It was I startled it just by walking by. Scared it. It usually the only snakes I've ever had do this were babies or juveniles. Adults don't really they don't really suck into that ball, or at least not that quick. They usually I'm sure a wild caught one might, but you know these big fat captive bred ones we have, they can't suck into that ball that fast. But yeah, I don't know.
I
See,
want to take
that's
that back. You said 26 species of pythons, right?
yeah,
Holy
maybe more, 27, something like that. And that's just a little bit.
how, bro?
There is so many other species, and there's a bunch of species I still like to get.
Wait,
Oh,
do you do it all by yourself, right?
yeah. I
How
do all.
how do you I'm
It's
sorry, that's over my head right now. Like how do you stay focused in on that many species?
oh, it's pretty easy. You know, that's another thing. See, you're gonna get me on these rants, man. I'm telling you, you get me
That's
going, I'll
that's
go.
fine. I
So
don't understand that. Like
this this
how
is
do
the
you work the
problem.
husbandry for 27 fucking species, dude?
It's super simple, man. People would be surprised how many species are really flexible and they don't need all that crazy like the python as a as the group is just they're not there's only a very few species in the pythonidae clade that is actually need specific care like the diamond python and the Boland's pythons to live and procreate. And even diamond pythons, I mean, they may not live long, but you can breed them like most pythons, and sometimes they do all right. But yeah, most python shoot, you know, another mentor, well, he wasn't much, he's someone I really look up to is Ryan Young. Look at the way he's doing it. He's breeding, he's bred this year probably. I think he said he finally hit his goal of beating not well surpassing Dave and Tracy Barker, who had the original goal of the most species of python ever bred. He surpassed that this year. I think he's at 32 different species, and it's like I said, it's not that hard. You just gotta just. I think some people just put too much thought into it and try to make things harder than they actually are.
Do you
Because
think we overcorrect it then? Like
yeah,
we think
well,
we see something.
there's like this stigma, I guess. Like I don't know. I've always been curious about why more ball python people are so terrified to diversify. I think there's a few reasons. One is they get told by other people who are more experienced because ball python people don't read books. If you don't tell them, they don't care. So they, you know, if a breeder goes, yeah, you got to do this, you got to do that, it's okay. I don't want to do that. But if you actually, if you dial back its care, it's really they're really not. I mean, look back at their care. They're not really all that difficult to do, you know, take care of and even breed. You know, well, that's cocky to say to breed. I mean, just most of the time, you could still fuck it up, but it's generally it's not too. It's really not that hard to, you know. Some of the species are just as easy, if not easier, than ball pythons. You know, like shoot, Antaresia breed like colubrids. However hard you might think that outside of the cooling, you don't have to do that crazy cooling, but I mean they breed crazy easy. I mean you just put them together and I mean they'll breed. I mean there's nothing to Antaresia and stuff, but yeah, a lot of people just like making it so. Well, you know, and another thing too is I've what is it? It was I was always wondering if ball python people are just afraid to get I don't know, it's either get picked on by other people because you keep other species. Have you noticed that the ball python community is vastly different than and I mean I follow every species I keep, I follow all the groups. I may not be an intricate part of all those groups, but I listen, I see how all of them act. And it's funny, literally all of them act pretty similar to each other. The only species that differentiate or break that rule kinda is retics to an extent, and now I'm noticing blood pythons
Bro,
are
I'm gonna
starting
I'm
to
gonna
really.
say it right now. Like the retic community is fucking toxic as shit.
Yeah, dude,
They attack each other constantly, man.
I could say some stories about retic
I
people that it's just
got
like,
yeah, I got out of that as fast as I got in it. Like I still keep them.
oh yeah,
Um,
I would
I'm
never.
actually I'm letting the retics go, and it
Oh
breaks
yeah.
my heart. But
Oh,
I don't have the room or the capacity with 3 kids to take
oh
care of them
yeah,
the way I
yeah.
need to, man.
But
Um,
I plan on getting some. Speaking of Ryan Young, he produced some ghost
yeah,
retics, which obviously working with Ben, I have like an affinity towards, and I saw that he produced them, and the problem with the retic community is it's getting a little bit better now, but before the whole Superdorf thing kicked off, everyone was so morph driven in it that they were just like morph this, morph that locality. Why would you do a normal? And they just forgot all the locality stuff and said, "Ah, fuck it, we don't care about that." And they just threw that aside. And now that you can't get any more imports, now they're just like, "Well, shit, I wish we had those locality retics now." And
right.
well, now you can't. And now, so
So that's
to
not
go,
even my issue, man. My issue in it was
oh, my issue
when
is
the
that.
fucking when the super dwarf mentality came in, right? And I love Garrett. I love what he's done. But
Oh
when
yeah,
that came in and you saw everyone else start saying, "Oh, this is 25% this and 10% this." So it's super dwarf. When technically unless you have a 40, I think it's 40%.
yeah,
Correct. Yeah.
something
40%
like
is not
that.
even classified as super dwarf in the first place. But then you get people that'll they'll mark it as a super dwarf. They won't say what the percentages are. And then if you try to ask them, okay, well, what's the locality? Well, I don't remember, but I know the mom came from this person and the sire came from this person. And why don't you ask them? I was like, you're the one that fucking bred them. How do you not know what these are? Why are you not
Yeah.
keeping your records, but you want to claim it as something? That just tells me that it's not that. But I don't know.
Oh,
There's a lot of freaking drama within that
yeah.
community, man,
Well,
and I can't deal with it.
how I fix that problem is like I just don't do the hybrids. And I'm gonna tell people. I Garrett talks about it, but I don't think it really sets into those retic people's minds yet, dude. Saputrii, Jampiensis, and Reticulatus are all three different species, and it will happen. It will happen. They will get set. Well, I shouldn't say will. I think there's a strong possibility they're going to get split off from each other because do you know there's 4 different species of Curtis, the short-tailed pythons? Well, there's four. There's Curtis,
Mhm.
which is the blacks or the Sumatran shorttails. Then you got Brongersmai and Brittensteini. Well, Brongersmai is Bloods, Brittensteini is Borneos, and then you have the Hmong python, which is I can't remember its scientific name, but they're 4 different species. Do you know how much those species diverged from each other? They are only 1.5% divergent from each other. Yet they got split off to separate species. And
Yeah.
they have quite a few differences from each other, like scalation and color really doesn't mean a whole lot, or patterns and stuff that can vary in just localities, but scalation and all that, and they're well divergent from each other. So they, without a doubt, the retics are going to get split up. Like there's no question they're going to get split up from each other. Yet I still hear retic people calling all of them localities. I go, dude, that's a species. Like it's going to be no different than Borneos and the short tails. It's the same. God, see, you're
Well,
going to get me all rant.
it's the same way we look at it within ball pythons too, though. Like if you want to look at that as a species, it's going back to simple genetics, and this has been a fight for what, like the last 4 or 5 years that I know of, where everyone's calling fucking dominant and incomplete dominant and co-dominant
Oh
and all that,
yeah, the
and they
gene.
get on that rant, and you can't figure out what the hell it is when it's laid out in simple genetics, but everyone wants to call it what it is to make a sale.
That That's and that's the God. You're gonna get me. There's all sorts of rants we can get on. We could just make this one whole rant set. So like with with ball pythons, that is
We're gonna
like,
call this "What Grinds My Gears" by Will
dude,
Filipek.
ball pythons are like a whole nother like it's. I've never seen such intelligent businessmen in any part of the reptile industry outside of Garrett in any other industry. Well, Nick, I think Nick Mutton's pretty good. He'll sell you he could sell you on a rock. He's pretty good. Anyways, but besides those guys, uh ball python people, I mean, they don't care about learning hardly anything. Like, I mean, as long as they know that, business 101, they don't care about nothing. And I think the problem with that is, and I've seen this, it doesn't happen often, but like, like I've seen people like, I don't know if you know who Ben Morrill is. He's a ball python guy who is an actual geneticist. He's actually one of the guys trying to work on that genetic testing for the genes, like the skins and all that. Well, he's a really good guy. I've seen him walk around Tinley. Nobody knows who he is. Well, not no one, but a lot of the newer people don't know who he is.
Right.
And they'll just start spouting this bullshit genetics like, yeah, like Spider doesn't have a super form, or, this is a co-dominant this, or, just spotting all this stuff that you're just like, all right, come on now. I
Everything
go,
has a super form.
I do not believe for once that there is a true dominant gene. The only one I've yet to see a super in, but it's just because I don't think anyone cares to see, is calico and sugar. But I've heard rumors that there is. No one tried, and really,
Right.
frankly, I don't even care to do it. So I don't like. I have a bunch of it, but I just like I'd never do it. But I don't know. It's just ball python people just, and that's fine, I guess. If you're only solely interested in the business and the pretty colors, that's fine. But I think the problem, it just, I don't know. Maybe it's just in my head. That's why I like looking into a lot of this, like the genetic side of everything, because I feel like if I'm going to do it, even though I only have a high school degree, I need to try to really make myself learn this stuff to the best of my ability. You're not going to be a professor, or I'm not going to be a professor, but at least try to learn it well enough that you can either speak well on it or not mislead new people, so new people
Right.
keep spreading the same false or nonsense that's been spread for the last 20 years in ball
Well,
pythons.
that's simple things, man. Like I think
Yeah.
that's a good point to make right now. Is I used to say it all the time, and I got so much fucking kickback on it. It wasn't funny. It was just like, hey, pick up a book or do your research, and they're like, it's a ball python. What do I need to research?
Dude, ball pythons have such an interesting, like, natural history of ball pythons. You know, like I'm curious about the history of ball pythons because it hasn't really been really worked on that much as far as their natural history. How did the African clade of pythons become what they've become? Because ball pythons are genetically very distinct from Netalenza, Sebi, and the Angolans and stuff. They're those that three clade of pythons are all very similar to each other and diverge from the same, you know, speed or same individual.
Right.
Ball pythons seem to be more genetically related to stuff like the short tails and the berms and stuff. So I don't like, and if you read the David and Tracy Barker book that like I have back here, there's like a huge natural history thing that I find super fascinating, and I guarantee this. We're dog and ball python people, but I guarantee you, but even the big breeders, I'm sure just went right to that morph page, like skipped half that chapter of all that, said, nope, don't care, and just and I'm just like, what? That's so interesting to me. Like, to me, it's more than just the aesthetics of the animal that appeal to me. Like, I can just look at a snake, look at its head, and I love how the scales are placed on their heads. And that goes for all pythons. And I don't know why I find that so fascinating, but I just think that's so cool. So I don't like, and then it's just the interest that everyone else had. And that's why I think so many people get burnt out in this industry when you're just so into one aspect of it and miss all this other stuff. And
Well,
just ball pythons
I
is
think
just,
that's what makes the greats the greats. Whether it's
yeah.
ball pythons or whatever species it is, you can't just focus on the sales side and like trying to make something cool. Like you need to actually have that passion for the animals. And we say that and everyone's like, "Oh, well, I really love my animals. I love my animals. I love my animals." Well, what do you fucking know about your animals?
Yeah.
Like, do you up until a few years ago, I think most people just thought, well, besides like Volta or something crazy that had a lot of talk, right? People were like, oh, well, ball pythons come from Ghana. I was like, they come from a lot more places than Ghana.
Oh
There's
yeah.
it's a whole strip across Africa that they come from.
Oh dude,
And like that's why I'm so excited about Dave. Like I don't want to nitpick on what's going to come. I haven't seen it, obviously. Like he hasn't released it to anyone, but like I'm super intrigued about what's going to be put in Kaufman's Ball Python movie and what's actually going
oh,
to get put out. You know what I mean? Like
I think that's gonna be, see,
I think it's
that
going to change people's perspectives, man. I
I
hope it
see,
does.
I could see it, but I see it like, I see a huge, that documentary sounds like it's gonna be a huge, have a lot of controversy, but not controversy, but there's like two sides of to the spectrums for that movie. I'm seeing the rat keepers and the bioactive keepers or naturalistic keepers. I kind of lump those two in the same category, but they're all, they're going head to head. I would read, I'm that dude. I'll go through the comments just to watch the shit show, and I'll look at it and I'll be like, wow, there's these people are just going at it. Like, one guy wanting to know more about ball pythons climbing trees, and another guy saying like, yeah, fuck those naturalistic keepers. Like I'm watching all this stuff unfold on these comments section, and I don't, I don't know. That kind of leads me into something else. Like I just don't get,
Uh,
I don't get the divide between the two, because I think we should definitely be working
oh,
more as a, especially if you're going to be a guy who sells ball pythons as pet keepers or to the pet keepers. Like, why would you want to argue with that? You should be striving to do some stuff like that so your customers have long term interest rather than just looking at
right.
a shitty tank with a pretty snake in it. You want the overall, the whole thing being pretty rather than just one aspect of it, you know?
Well, and
And
it's like, so if you do that, that's gonna make them, and I don't think people realize this, but that's gonna make them come back. Like if I tell you, hey, throw a couple plants, some dirt, and a heat element, maybe change their water a couple times a week, that would be nice. Like don't
yeah.
be a douchebag. Your ball python will survive 20, 30 years.
Oh,
Or
dude,
you can make something that you enjoy, like make reenact its environment. And maybe it's just because I've been I've had Ryan and Erica in my head too long now. At
yeah.
this point, like that's
Well,
I want to make everything as naturalistic as I can, but I understand with the breeding aspect, I really can't do that at this point. Like what my ambitions are with this, I can't do that. Now, the
see,
ones that aren't going to be bred, I fully plan on
yeah.
doing.
So I'm kind of like in the, like, all right, I don't I don't buy into the whole the snakes need the bioactive naturalistic enclosures. And the reason why I say this is because if you look at so many species of not just pythons, but snakes in general that can live in human environments, shit, they can live in your house and you not know it, and they can live just fine in your house that is far from naturalistic. So I don't buy the snakes. I don't think they give a shit what they're in, but I think the naturalistic keeping is solely needs to be for you to engage you and your eyes. Because if you got like some eyesore in your house, why the hell do you want that? Why would you want that just sitting in your house? But if you had something like the zoo, like a zoo style enclosure, then that's going to draw like shit. You might watch that more than television.
Well,
You
that's what
know
I was
that,
gonna say too. Is like it's not necessarily like the health of the animals should be
Yeah.
the number one priority, right? But if I put something that's in an enclosure that's aesthetically pleasing to me, the care of that animal is going to happen way more often than okay, I walked in this room. There's 100 tubs in here. I need to clean 100 tubs. And when I open the tub, hey, it looks great. Like I love the way the animal looks. And hey, I have some reptile or whatever sort of substrate you choose to use. I'm not gonna push the substrate on people, right? Or paper towels or whatever. Like it is what it is. I use multiple different types, right? But you look at that and you're like, okay, I got to clean it. Okay, I got to give it water. Okay, I like the snake, and when it's out, I enjoy handling it, and it was a great experience. Now, 2-3 days later, when I have to do it again, I'll give you some more attention. Whereas you're walking by and you're like, okay, I'm gonna watch this. Oh, cool, it's using that. I put that in there to see if it use it, and now it's using it, or it's getting more aspects of like I won't even say naturalistic, but you're seeing it engage with its enclosure more versus
Yeah.
just staying in one spot because it has something to explore.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
gonna
there's
put
like
more care to that animal, I think.
there and it kind of no, I will say that's kind of when it's like the very not always, but is kind of species certain species do better in certain scenarios. Like with the white lips, they're very well, anything like as far as white lips and the rings, they're so high strong that if you put them in too open of a tank that they don't have enough places to hide and there's too much traffic, they're going to be more inclined to hit that glass and stuff. And that's why I think some of the I know people breed them in enclosures, but I think like if you can get a big enough tubs generally they just hold humidity better and it's more secure. Because I tell you what, if I put them in a cage, it would bang their face against, because I don't really keep a lot of this stuff in well, not naturalistic at all, really, just very basic hides, give them stuff to hide in, and that's pretty much it. Maybe branches,
Um,
depending on the
I'm not
species.
shitting on that, man.
Oh,
Like
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
saying, like there's a place for either one. I understand the breeder side of it, where
yeah,
you need to do the best way you can make their climate in that area, right?
yeah,
And what's going to be best for them and help them live that full life cycle and breed and do all that. I understand that. I'm not shitting on that at all. I fully I understand that point to say it in the least, but I also understand the other point. Like, and
I
I
think it,
guess it's just because I've had both sides
yeah.
argued so much to me.
I think it's just having a happy medium because like I have nothing against what you're saying, but it's more so like portraying to the audience, trying to inform them that because yeah, I think more ball python people need to work on that naturalistic stuff. Shoot, I think honestly, if you're going to be a ball python breeder and you only plan on breeding a few of them, maybe think about keeping them in more of a naturalistic enclosure. So whenever you do sell those pet animals, you can inform them how to do it rather than just saying, here you go, and just be like, well, I can't help you because I don't do that, you
Right.
know? And that's probably at least with the ball pythons, I've noticed that's a big, I think it's a fairly big problem and why so many people might lose interest. And if they don't find a new species with someone who knows how to keep more of a naturalistic enclosure or knows how to do that, well, then they just lose interest and say, I don't want to keep snakes anymore. And then they end up getting out. And that's just the shame, because,
Right.
that leads me into another topic as far as this naturalistic keeping goes and why I think it's very vital for the future of reptile keeping. So, um, I think the zoo, or not the zoos, I think the private sector has something that we can do for conservation better than any other segment of branch of like conservation, like zoos, biologists. I mean, because I listened to a podcast, I think it was a year ago or something, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was these wildlife biologists who are very anti-captive or captivity, and I mean, I'm talking zoos like AZA zoos.
That's the way
They
the
don't
AZA is. They refuse
do
to work with your
well. I'm
local
talking
breeders
well. Well,
or anything
they
domestic.
They will to a certain degree, but you have to be a certified AZA.
Right.
But that I'm talking like the guys, the biologists I'm talking about, they don't believe in even like AZA zoos should be keeping these animals. Like they don't think animals should be in captivity at all. Like I'm talking straight PETA member type people. Well, I think, and this is me kind of this. It's gonna sound like I'm a rag on zoos now, but the problem with zoos are, and I truly believe these guys when they say that because I work with a bunch of non-animal people, and you know what most people do when they go to zoos? Get entertainment, distract
And
their
leave.
kids. They're not going to learn anything. They, I mean, they might know, the tigers from Asia or India or, a lions from Africa. They're going to maybe learn that. And, that's probably pretty much it. And then when they leave, they're going to forget about it. I am a very strong believer in this old saying, out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And when you don't see something constantly or it's not a part of your life, you forget it. That's why so many species have died off because we do not care about stuff. And I'm not just talking about animals. We generally don't care about stuff till it's too late or almost too late. It's either almost too late or too late for us to save it.
Right.
And I think as private keepers, if we can keep I'm not saying give people elephants and tigers now, but as far as like
Damn
reptile
it.
community,
I was
as
totally
far
gonna go for an
yeah,
elephant, bro.
right. I would do the leopards and lions and tigers if I could, but anyways, like if we could just get these species in people's houses and put them in naturalistic environments, you are going to have people be a lot more wanting to be involved in something rather than oh, I don't see it, I don't care, because I think the ultimate example of this is look at cats and dogs, particularly dogs. Cats aren't they're a little different since they don't really look a whole lot different than their wild counterparts. But when you look at
It's
dogs
because they
compared to,
haven't been domesticated.
well,
As much as
they're a lot,
people want to,
yeah, they're a lot shorter domestication. Their domestication's a bit different. You're talking about an animal that's a solitary animal, like people talk about
saying though,
domestic.
like if
Yeah.
we all know it, you could have a domesticated cat.
Oh,
You throw it outside for a week or two, it's not domesticated anymore. It might still
yeah.
give you that domesticated attention that you think
Yep.
is a normal cat, but it's completely changed. It wants to hunt, it wants to do everything because its instincts kick back in.
Oh yeah. Same thing with pigs.
A
Pigs are the
dog,
same way.
yeah,
Yeah.
a dog's
Well,
not gonna
and
revert back to that.
some dogs will. That's why you still get like like Illinois. When I went to college for a little while. Ina, Illinois. I've never seen so many stray dogs just all over the place. It was ridiculous how many stray dogs I've seen out there. But anyways, back to what I was saying earlier. This whole God, you're gonna lead me down the rabbit hole of rants too. Like
You're being
it's there. Well, it so because I did a survey at some reptile shows because I was generally curious if like if people really think like this. I had a survey where I had like top 5 favorite animals, domesticated included. And dude, I'm no joke, probably 80% of those, 90% of those
the
had
same animal.
dogs. They had dogs. But you know what I never saw on that list? A wolf or a coyote. Nobody cared. Why? Because that animal doesn't really look like your dog. And it's kind of just it's a sad, and this leads me down another path. This is why I'm pretty against hybrids because it falls into the same category. Why, if you start hybridizing these animals and they don't look like their original wild counterparts, and morphs can be guilty of this too. The crazier the morph it, and I'm guilty of it. I do it too. But the more genes you get into an animal that doesn't look like the wild type animal, you start losing that appreciation for that animal. And when you start losing that appreciation for that animal, then you start not to care about, it's different. You could watch it, you could see someone shoot a coyote or a wolf, and most people it may not affect. Animal people it will, but the general public probably not going to give a shit. I've seen this. I saw a video yesterday of a crocodile grabbing a feral dog. That dog, it was no one's dog, so it was about as wild as a canine can get, or a domesticated canine, and it grabs it, takes it, and eats it. So it was a part of the ecosystem at that point. It just part of the food chain. Ate it. You know how many comments I saw in there saying, "Oh, why that poor dog? Why would they? Someone should kill that crocodile." And I'm just like, you
It's
know,
nature.
it's nature, and it's just like that's what I
Mm,
mean. If that was a coyote or a wolf that
right.
got taken,
They would have,
no one, the people
yeah,
would have
they
been
would have
like,
celebrated the
they
crocodile.
they might have been like, there might have been, like I said, it's not a total blanket thing. Like some
Right.
people would have cared, but the vast majority of people would have just been like, oh well. So that's what I mean when I tell people, if we can get these animals into more people's houses and keep more naturalistic enclosures to keep people more intrigued and more involved in it, I think that could do so much more for conservation than any zoo or any biologist could do. And this is, there's this is how my mind works now. Like very differently than a lot of people in the reptile industry. I'm looking to where, how can we help the industry as far as these animals in the wild? We're not like, because you talk to a lot of old timers who are purists. I hear the same thing. They tell you, oh, it's because maybe we can keep these animals going, that maybe one day they could be released back in the wild. That's nonsense. That's probably
We're
never
beyond
gonna.
that, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
that's
we're
that's
way beyond that.
never that's never gonna happen. Well, I won't say never. Select few people are allowed to do that, and those are the people who work with the AZA zoos and stuff. But if you want to help someone without having to, like, fill out a bunch of paperwork to try to become an AZA member, or work with the AZA or whatnot, I think that's truly the best way you can do it. Just like what Garrett's done with the super doors. Now I will give him slack. He does a lot of the Morse, and like I said, Morse don't help, and it is what it is. But at least he still shows appreciation towards the wild type animal, which I think where the ball python kind of lost that, you know, you kind of they lost it there. They dropped the ball. You know,
That's what I think. That's what the Morelia community's done a really good job on. Is
yeah,
there's a lot of purists, and if
it,
if
it's
you're
not
ballsy enough to mix localities or things like
it's
that,
not
you're
too
gonna hear it.
it's not too bad.
Mm.
This is the thing with the Morelia community, and I think they're starting to realize it now. But this is going to be this is like, because recently the Fish and Wildlife really busted down because Australia wanted to stop having uh, captive animals being exchanged all over the world outside of Australia. So they went to the Fish and Wildlife in the U.S., and I guess they cracked down on the regulations as far as export and import, like
Right.
even just to other countries out,
Okay.
obviously not Australia. And now we're kind of we're even more restricted on the gene pool we have now. So this is a hard one to say, but dude, some of these Australian animals will not, unless something changes, will not be here in, say, the next 2 to 4 decades. So depending on the species and how many, there's going to be some that are going to withstand it, and it's a shame. Same thing with retics. There's going to be retics where, well, a lot. Look at the Indian pythons. Like Sri Lankans and the Indians. They're going to die out, and it's such a shame that back. I remember listening to like Vin Russo and Eugene and all of them talk about back in the day. The 70s and 80s were, and Tom Crutchfield was another one where you'd hear them talk about the Indian pythons. We could, they were breeding them just as often as Burmese pythons for the most part, and unfortunately, people start hybridizing the two, and then now that they have, because of the laws, and now they're endangered, you can't get them imported anymore.
Right.
And now that's a species that's going to die out. Like that one might legitimately die out in the next 15 years,
Yeah, we're
maybe.
gonna
I
see it in
mean,
our lifetime because the bloodlines
it's
are dried.
it's
Like,
it's good. They're going to die out. And I tell people, and it's hard for Australian people and even maybe some retic people right now to hear that. and say, oh, well, maybe if we cross these lines, and well, then we'll have to hybridize them, right? You can, but then you kind of fall into that situation I was telling you earlier. Well, then you kind of start losing that appreciation for the animal if it doesn't quite look like it did in the wild. You start losing. You may not think you are, but I think instinctually you start losing touch with nature when that animal starts looking more and more and more different. The more different it looks, the more you're gonna slowly and surely forget about that wild type, and where it all most people anyways
But
are
I
gonna
think that
probably
falls
forget that.
on man, that falls on the zoos too, though, because like their
Yeah,
mission is to conserve and like reproduce these animals for conservation, right? But they give like you're not even if you see it and you appreciate it for that moment or you go through one education show, you're not going to remember it like you said.
yeah,
And most of these zoos like they're purely volunteer basis because you have to have I think it's I don't remember if it's 500 or 5,000 hours before you could be like work within an AZA. So how many volunteers that are working towards that lose their passion and just give up on being a volunteer? They put in
oh,
a year or two, they don't reach their hours and they don't care what's happening around them. They do it as a typical 9 to 5 at that point and don't care. And then
some
you're
of it,
not getting these education shows. You get like one education show a day on a tour and they show like 5 or 6 animals, which are their money makers within that facility.
yep,
And your people are only spending an hour and a half within this entire zoo that has upwards of 200 species sometimes. Like I
oh
know
yeah,
our local zoo has, I think, 15 or 16 different reptile species. And you might see one within the education show. One out of
yeah,
20 species. Like that's insane. So they're not going to care about anything else. And even then, it's a reptile, and there's these fuzzy animals over here. So why should I care about it unless you're already a reptile enthusiast? Like I think it's poor the way that zoos do it at this point, and I don't know that
yeah.
it'll ever get changed.
I and I think it could, and this is what I mean by, and I don't think this will ever happen because we have such a problem with getting people to donate money to the U.S. Ark, let alone to tell them to donate money to a wild, like some sort of like I try to donate a what I consider a decent sum of money to different biologists like Daniel Natouche. I messaged him earlier in the year and I said, man, I've been captive breeding some animals for like a decade now, and I've been like really getting and earning to want to like support people who get these animals, like study these animals in the wild. And I asked him, hey, is there anything I could donate to that it particularly helps pythons? Just because that's my clay to animals I enjoy. And I was just like, because I want to feel like I'm donating towards stuff that I have, you know, to help the animals in the wild, feel like I'm actually contributing something,
Right.
outside of just in captivity and what I think should be at least try to be the wave of the future, as far as trying to help some of these species because, you know, so like I said, some of these species will not be around for very long. And if we don't try to do something as far as like show the government and show even like the only people who can get Australian animals is the AZA. Now, if we can make a like the problem is I don't know if you ever read that book, The Invisible Ark,
Mm-mm.
Defensive Captivity by Dave and Tracy Barker. Well, Dave worked at the Dallas Zoo for a long time, and he would talk about his experience, and he would talk about how back I'm gonna butcher the year, but I think in the 60s and 80s, I could be wrong. There was much more of a collect these rare animals and then breed the rare animals. And then I think around the 90s, like I said, I hope I'm not butchering the years. I think it was the 90s. Then PETA got involved and PETA started cracking down. Well, the zoos didn't know how to defend themselves. So the zoo said,
Right.
okay, we'll do whatever you
We'll
say.
back off. Yeah.
And they do the opposite of what we did. You hold the middle finger to them is what we did. We told them like, no, but And so they had a huge shift. So then, and I don't, if you're going to display animals to the public, I think they did the right thing. But us being private keepers, I don't think we need to really take that route. At
Right.
least, like I said, with reptiles and stuff like that. I'm not talking like the elephants and all that nonsense, but you know, us private keepers, zoos do you educate the public, show people these animals that are and they do great things as far as most people will never see these animals in the wild. Rather they go extinct or they just can't afford to do it. But maybe leave the private sector to help you with the breeding and procreation of these animals, And like I said, and the zoos may not want to hear it because I, I I think some of them get a little irked when they hear those people that go to zoos that are animal keepers and they say, "I have this, I have that," And I think it kind of they loses that luster of the wow factor that the zoos sometimes, most zoos try to do. So
Well, I think that falls into like, so we have our everyday breeders, and I agree, man. But I think that's finding your passion project outside of it. Like your passion project should be something that you not necessarily care more about, but like it's something isn't commonplace. Like I don't know what it is about Dracos for myself, and I've said this a couple of podcasts now. Like there's just something about that little agamid that freaking glides from tree to tree. I think it's really cool, and I think it'd be awesome to have a room full of them. The issue is it's all imported still, and when it's imported, it comes in and they're all dehydrated and you're lucky to keep them alive for a year, let alone get them up to maturity to try to breed them. And the few people in the states that I know of that have done it, they usually get a pair and they get them to that breeding size, and then one of them comes down with issues and they end up
uh,
losing their breeding pair.
yeah, that's kind of like the problem when it comes to wild caught animals. If you're gonna do wild caught animals, you should try to keep a group of things, and
Right.
that leads me to another topic: importers. I think more importer. The problem with import animals is obviously it's a business to them and they need to make money, but I think that shit should be left to the breeders. Or the experienced breeders. Don't if they could just keep that stuff and then we get it and we breed it and then sell it to the general public or sell it back to the I would probably wouldn't sell it back to the importers because they're going to put the captive bred and wild caught stuff together. But sell it to or pet stores and stuff like that. And it's just like I don't know, losing a train of thought.
But I think that was our own fault. Like, especially if you
Yeah.
look at ball pythons. So like we're always looking for the next change, right? So that's what we're doing. We're looking at pictures and we're like, well, I want that one, and that one, and maybe I could prove it out genetically and make a change. But the hype from that is it's never going to take away from that business. You're always going to have that business, and the new people, you're not going to get it to just the experienced people because the new people are always going to want to be on that trend. They're always going to want to find that one thing that's going to make me stand out because I made this special morph or it didn't just pop up locally in my collection. Like I need to find a way to make a name for myself. So I'm going to
It,
import all this crazy shit and bring all kinds of disease and all kinds
and
of
you
craziness into my fucking collection. Like,
that
I don't know.
that
I'm not
leads
shitting on the people that import animals and take care of it. Like some people do it right, but I'm just saying, I don't think you're going to be able to make it just experienced people because everyone wants to have that new morph pop up.
I okay, so and that now now this is going to lead me down another ball
Oh, I'm
python
sorry.
conversation. So with the morphs, right? And this is the problem, people need to they really need to like look at the history of the ball pythons, right? Look at like how the so back when in 2000 when some or well 90s we'll go mid to early 90s when some of these morphs came were starting to roll in. Well, what the process was there was breed it to as many normals as possible, breed it to so you can get it out there, and then eventually people start breeding them together and they go, oh, this is cool. So then you had two different competing things. You had the combo captive bred combo. Well, the other ones are captive bred too, but you had the combo animals and you had the rare single gene animals that were, still top dollar, and they were competing and competing, and then the new morphs start drying up, and they've almost disappeared for them. I mean, as far as the big people asking just huge numbers on these projects, or certain morphs or whatever. And then it became how many. This is kind of the era I came in, is when let's add as many incomplete dominant genes into one snake as possible. Shit, I worked with one that was probably one of the more well-known guys who did it, being Ben. And then then you could tell the industry start dipping down. Rather, it was, and I think it was because people realized how hard some of those like 6-8 gene incomplete dominant traits are to hit, and people kind of just, you saw the market dip. And then Justin came out with this recessive stuff, the clown stuff, and then you start seeing another trend going, and then it became recessives are the new hot thing, and the multi-gene animal, or the multi-incomplete dominant animals, are kind of dying off and becoming very pet-like animals pretty quickly too. And then then it start picking up, and then people start going, oh, Justin start knocking out double recessives. Then people going, oh, double recessives are thing. Now triples and all this stuff, and I'm just like,
Guilty.
Look at the way and I am too. I couldn't tell you how many double head puzzle projects I have, but if you look at it, it's good. This is gonna, especially because I'm working.
It's gonna tank eventually.
It's gonna do it for a few reasons. One is because people are gonna realize that shit's a lot harder than it looks, and I'm not gonna lie, guys. More genes in a snake doesn't make it better. It doesn't matter if it's recessive or incomplete dominant. Dude, I'm not joking. I'm starting to see a bunch of clown pieds and just regular pied combos that are starting to look very similar to other multi-genes that are allegedly different genes that are starting to look very similar to each other. And you're like, wasn't this what we were trying to avoid doing years ago? Whenever people would bitch about, oh, we have 8 gene snake and they all start looking alike. Well, now we have double recessive.
When everything made a white snake and you couldn't tell what was in it because you put so many genes together.
It was that, and now it's like, all right, now we got a mostly white snake with some orange spots with no other pattern other than maybe a line of its head from the clown, and that's all you got. And now you're just like, well, that's pretty cool, but why would I spend $15,000 on that if I can get, some other gene that does the similar thing? And I think this is a bold prediction, but I think if you look at other species, it's kind of a trend that happens. So for selective breeding in every species is a huge thing, except ball python people. Ball python people have not accepted that. They think selective breeding is if I buy one animal that is the best quality of that gene, then that's all I got to do. And I go, that's just the one animal. If nothing else in your collection has those other polygenetic traits and those that make that snake look the way it looks, it's not gonna pass that crazy color on. You're gonna get a wide range of looks. And that's another thing with ball python people is they keep saying, oh, this gene's so variable. This gene's so variable. You can have totally different ends of the spectrum. Well, of course, because you're not selectively breeding. Yeah. Whenever you start selectively breeding for traits you like or things you like, you can turn your collection. And my biggest regret, and I wish I would have done it, is I could have had 2 different lines of puzzle, a striped puzzle and a standard puzzle. I was producing these weird striped puzzles, and there was no hidden gene, no nothing, just randomly striped puzzles. And I could have made a striped puzzle line. I didn't because I had so many males that I just couldn't. It was a dick fest for the last few years in my collection as far as producing stuff. I was like, I just can't do it. If I get a female, I'll definitely hold it back. But if I'm just going to get stuck with males, I'm going to sell it off. And who knows, if I don't do it, I might just buy more stuff or buy that stuff back from those people. But like I said, selective breeding is a lot more tedious than ball python people tend to think. But I think if somebody, and this is where I think small breeders can be adjusting. Well, kind of adjusting. I don't think you're going to make a pastel so great that people drop their 6 gene recessives or whatever and get a crazy pastel. But you can show people that there's other ways you can make a business. You can be the guy who selectively breeds black pastel, but it can be black pastel too. All these traits.
Look at Tom.
Oh
I
yeah.
talked to him a couple weeks ago. Like it's
There is the only people I think that are doing it, and I don't follow them as often as I should, which sounds bad for me spouting all this selective breeding, but there's these breeders in India that I've been noticing. I saw them selectively breeding like lesser combo or lessers, and you're trying to get the best looking lesser you can get, and then working on putting combos to it. And I mean, there's all kinds of, you can do it with every. I got another one too. When you get these genes that are allelic, and you say so, like, and I've seen this happen too in Ben's collection. People look at Mojave and Lesser, two different genes. But if you start breeding a blue-eye leucistic animal, and that's how you say it, and you breed that animal to whatever normals, if you're going to breed it to normals, doesn't happen all the time, but every so often you get like this gene crossing where you start getting animals that look very weird, like animals that look like they could be a hybrid between a lesser and a Mojave. Like it's almost to the point where it's hard to tell, almost like a newbie wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Like that's how different they can look. And people don't think you could do the same thing with like this whole mahogany and stranger thing, enhancer desert ghost thing. Shit, even genes that aren't allelic, like you can make cryptics look like puzzles. I mean, they already kind of do, but you could line breed them to look like that. There's all types. I mean, and people think when I say selective breeding, they think, oh, just make it brighter. No, I mean, you can completely change the look of a gene depending on how hard you're willing to work in it. Like, there's a project I'm trying to work on. I really don't want to divulge it till I'm actually working on it more. Mostly because if you say it, ball python people aren't going to give a shit unless you have, which I understand. If you don't have proof of this, then why talk about it? But there's a gene that is probably considered. Oh, I can tell you what the gene is because no one's going to assume what I'm going to do. Like Desert Ghost. I really don't like Desert Ghost. There's a reason for it. I call it the cop-out gene. I call it's lazy people that don't want to selectively breed, so we're just going to enhance it with a gene that just quote-unquote, makes them pretty. But the heterozygous animals look like dog shit. And I've seen this before. One of the biggest, this is me talking some shit now, one of the biggest DG breeders out there, yeah, I think one of the bigger ones, makes beautiful DG combos. But dude, his heterozygous animals look like dog shit. Like his pastels are probably the brownest. I mean, they just look a shade darker than brown. Like, I mean, they're terrible. But there is you can selectively breed DG in so many different ways. So many. And I'm working with the gene just to prove to people you could do it. Like, I am not going to even put DG into anything else outside of the selective breeding project that I had planned. So I'm doing it all from scratch. I got one animal that looked like it kind of had the characteristics I'm looking for, and I got 4 imported ball pythons. And let me tell you, that's a terrible idea. People who get imported ball pythons, don't do it, because I haven't had a mite problem till I brought them in and quarantined them, and then found out everything had mites in the and then I'm like, shit. So then I had a mite ordeal, and I had to take care of that. And that leads up to a quarantine situation that needs to be talked about more in this hobby, but that's a whole different subject. But like I said, and I'm going to do this, and it could take 10, 15. You know, I get a lot of this inspiration from the Morelia community. And probably one of my this guy's a mentor to me is Nick Mutton. You know, he he can be he can come off kind of arrogant when people talk to him because he knows a little bit about everything, and it can kind of be off putting to some people. But he knows his shit, and when like you hear him talk and you see what he's doing, and you just go, well, then why can't I? You can do this with a ball python,
Right.
but people don't want to do it because if I can get a gene to do it and make it easier for me, then I'm just going to go that route. But I don't know. That's just my rant with the morph thing and the ball pythons. Like, they have nothing against morphs. I love morphs, and I can talk the puzzle gene all day. But I can also talk 50 other species of python, even ones I don't keep. I'm getting in the boas, and I've been getting like geeking out on the locality boa stuff here, like Imperador and Constrictor, and that stuff's just super neat. And then the Corrales complex, I've been really geeking out on that and their whole evolution, like how they became what they've become. So that's like I said, I can find so much stuff that's interesting in the hobby that people just if they just broaden their scope, you could never get bored in this hobby. You know, you might overwhelm yourself.
Yeah.
That's a problem. You might overwhelm yourself so bad that it's just too much, and you just burn yourself out that way, I guess, rather than just being bored. But I mean, there's so much you can do. I even like okay, even if you wanted to do this as a business, there's so many different ways you can do it, rather than just following the same formula that you see all these other people doing. Like, I just don't get it when you see the way Garrett did suit, dude. I wish some of these new people knew how much people did not give a shit about super dwarfs. Dude, 10 years ago, I was at a local reptile show, and a buddy of mine had a friend of his had a clutch of super dwarfs that he was trying to sell at a show. Nobody won them. They were like 100, maybe 7,500 bucks. The dude came up to me with a deli cup, said, dude, just take it and you can pay me later. Rewind 10 years later, I finally was like, you know, I got the space. I'm going to get some locality, with some of the retic species now, or localities or species. It didn't matter to me, but I finally decided to branch out in some of that stuff. And I spent over $2,000 for a animal I could have gotten for damn near free before. And to see that transition is mind blowing to me. And I don't see why people don't take that and do it with something else. Now, I'm not saying you can do white lips for a living or water pythons for a living, but
No, I think it's
you could be a ball python guy who is also known for white lips, known for water pythons, known for this whatever species. It
well,
doesn't
I
have to
think
be
a
just
lot of those
boas.
things they're just so niche because so many people were scared of them or they were told, hey, this is a hard species to keep. And so they wanted to take the easy route and they're like, well, there's money here. So why don't I just stay here? But it was like when I was looking at you and we set this up, like the day that I saw, and I texted you the same day. I was like, dude, I just saw that you hatched. Like I'm a month behind, but I just saw, or not even hatched, but I just saw that your white lips laid. When they
Oh, that was
hatch, I want a female.
they're they're only a few days out. I mean, they could it literally almost any day now. They're dimpling pretty good, so they should be hatching soon.
Right.
So
But that's what I'm saying though, is like
yeah,
you have that niche with white lips right now. And it's one of those, I know you well enough and I'm comfortable with you well enough. So you're now going to be mentoring me through that process, even though you don't think that pythons are that well, hopefully mentoring me. We'll see if I don't bug you
it,
too much before.
it's
but
it,
that's what I'm saying. It's like now I know, okay, so I have 4 to 5 years to get her mature. I have the one that I'm bringing in that's 2 years ahead of her, but I'll just it gives me that time to learn the animal and just take it. And it's going to be a niche thing for me. I'm not going to try to go and breed hundreds of white lips every year, but it's something that
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever have the capacity to even attempt Bolins. I might eventually have the money to try to do a pair of Bolins, but I won't ever have, I don't think, the capacity with what I'm trying to do Bolins, because I'm focused on too many things that are opposite of it. Like I want to play with too many Australian species, or I'm getting out of retics right now, but I want to get back into retics. Like I already want it back. It's just I know I don't have the capacity right now with my space. So once I have a bigger area to work, I'm definitely getting back into retics, whether it's mainlands or dwarf, super dwarf, what
Yeah.
have you. But it's things like that. Like I you have to have the passion projects, I think. Like you have to have something that keeps you motivated throughout all of it. And I'm not saying that ball pythons and stuff like that don't motivate people, but you need to find that niche thing so that you don't fall into just one aspect.
Yeah, because I remember coming up in the industry at the time where, you know, the big breeders, there were people that were known, like all your big breeders at the time were always known for multiple species. Like Ben Riddick was known for ball pythons, retics, and anacondas. Bob Clark was known for retics and berms. Peter Call, ball pythons and boas. Barchek, fucking everything. Uh, what else? I mean, dude, the list goes on and on. There, uh, Greg Graziani was known for ball pythons and alligators. Like seriously, all these old, and then it stopped, and then it just became one species or just ball pythons in particular. I know a lot of other species keepers that are they most of them do other species, and ball pythons. I'm starting to notice they're dabbling in stuff, but ball python people, well, it's not just ball python people. They're very like trendy people. Like they like things that are, well, we were talking about it, like trends. Like a water monitor, a retic. What other terrible animal would be a great first pet? They just want these animals that are like, of course you shouldn't breed that animal because not everyone should own those kind of animals. But there are a ton of other
Morlets.
smaller. Yeah, that is, my
I
God,
can't
people.
tell you how many people like just here locally. So there's a guy that comes to the show that just started here locally, and he brings 4 to 5 baby Morlets every single time. And at least one of them goes. And those people never come to my little table afterwards, thank God. But it's just like you don't realize what that's. Maybe you do, but 90%. Actually, I'm willing to bet probably 99.99% of the people that walk in there have no clue what that's going to grow into, have no idea how to actually care for it. They definitely don't have the space here locally to take care of one when it's fully grown. Like
That
they
and you
don't
know
have the patience to train it, so you're going to get freaking
and
lit up and
the
trade
problem
it
with
at like a year to a year and a half to the zoo, if the zoo will take it, because you're not AZA.
the problem with like the problem with stuff like those, the crocodilians, retics, and monitors is, you know, you were in the military. I was in sports, like pretty like wrestling. I don't know if you know much about wrestlers, but they're crazy. I mean, absolute bad shit crazy. But if you've never been in a situation where your life could be in danger,
Not
a
could
lot
be.
of
It
people,
will be. At one
in
point, it
some,
will be.
well, like, you know, I couldn't tell you how many people I would see. Like, I work in this sandpaper company, and a tank would catch on fire, and how many people would just stare at it and not think about getting a fire extinguisher. I go, this is what I'm talking about. You get people who, like, if they get bit
Guilty
by
of that.
some, well, but
Guilty
I
of
get
that
it.
shit.
You're a military guy. I know, and you know how to handle a situation. But like when people lose their shit or people getting in super high stressful situations, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to stay calm and handle a situation. Now, I'm not saying I can handle all situations, but there's
Right.
like with big constrictors, you know, for the most part, like I've been wrapped by a few big ones, and you kind of you know, as long as you're calm, it's okay. You know, it's not,
Ish.
yeah.
Ish.
But most people, yeah,
Like
ish.
So those that have watched the channel for a long time or like listened to this, they probably know about it. But the time I visited Cusco is when he still had Grumpy, right? From Garrett.
Oh,
And Grumpy almost got me. Like I
almost.
was one of 3 people, I think, that
I saw what
within that
happened to
household.
Brandon.
Yeah, I was one of 3
Brand,
people within that household that even handled Grumpy without protection, let alone handled her at all. And I felt the wind when she went for me, but I
oh
turned the
yeah,
right way and I let go of her body and I karate chopped at her neck, which was stupid in the first place because if she had turned at all,
yeah,
my hand would have been
yeah.
meat, like
Oh yeah.
unusable at this point. But that was my instincts, like I was turning away and I was just like, no. And right after, Garrett's like, dude, I'm so proud with how gentle you handled her because most people wouldn't have. I was like, I wasn't fucking gentle at all. I karate chopped your snake, bro. Like I hit it right in the head, right in the neck, right behind the head, and I got away with it. And I shouldn't have, but that goes to tell you that you don't know how you're going to react till you're in the situation, for one.
Yeah.
So have a mentor, especially when you're dealing with large constrictors. Like Cusco's obviously watching everything that's happening, and he's giving me advice throughout. Like you saw within that video for him, you saw probably 10 minutes of handling. Both the pulling out and putting back into her enclosure took me a solid 45 minutes to an hour, and I was a fat kid at that point and a truck driver, and there was nothing left there. Like I was huffing and puffing at the end, and people don't think about that either. They're like,
Oh
"Oh,
yeah.
look at this 5-second video from this TikToker or YouTuber, and they had no issue." And
I had a
it's
I
bro,
had a
that's not
golden
how
child.
it is.
I had a golden child at Ben's place one time that worked me so hard that I had to hover over the trash can to puke because I was like, this thing getting it because I don't. So the way Ben and us would clean is we none of his retakes were very nice. None of them. There was only, like I said, a few snakes that would handle like being messed with. But he had this golden child that just really didn't like getting messed with. Well, he would stick the snake in. We would stick the snake in like a, I don't even know what they're, 90 quart tubs with the lid halfway on, and you'd snake it in there. I don't. Ben was these are Ben's animals, so he just knew them better than me. But if they turned around, he'd bop them on the nose. I'm not gonna lie, I did not trust him at all. I've seen what they did behind his. He had one of his was a Sunfire Heck Ghost on his shoulder, and that thing just did this behind, like open mouth, right behind his head. He didn't see any of it. I saw the whole thing. I go, if that latched onto the back of your head, boy, that would have hurt. I go, never trusted him. And he had this other retake. I it was a special retake. It looked like if you thought a snake could have Down syndrome, this snake looked like it had Down syndrome. Like it had a kink in its neck, real buggy eyes, kind of just looked stupid. I mean, it was an adorable
It's
little
like a
retake.
snarfles.
Yeah, kind of just not too fucked up of a face, but it was pretty fucked up. Well, the snake was always chill, never had a problem. And I guess it was going through a cycle and it was hungry all the time. I remember sliding that kid. I was standing, say here, opening the door to my right, slid it open. That snake come flying out of there, and it's on the bottom cage, so it's by my knees. And I was like, I'm not gonna really need to watch this snake. It's usually pretty chill. It come flying out like that, and I go, that's it. Do not trust any of them no more
Hmm.
at all. Like I was like, that could have been another nut incident there too, because I was like right there, right nut level. That could have been game over. So I was just like, don't trust any. Like I'll mess with them, but there's always that sense of I still don't trust you. I will mess with
There's a
you, but
caution. Yeah.
I keep my eye out on their heads and stuff. And if I mess with enough species, you can kind of tell when they're getting, I don't know, either way too curious for their own good, like a food curiosity, and then when there's like a just, I don't know, like a inquisitive curiosity. So yeah, retakes are takes same thing with monitors too. Like I don't know, I have no experience with monitors, but the few I have seen, the way they do that twitchy head thing like birds do, don't trust them either. I go, the way that thing looks at my hand or feet, I go, there ain't no way, because it looks like it's just looking to aim and then just plop its mouth right under whatever it is it's looking at. And I go,
Mhm.
no, I'm not doing that either. I go, and that's why I just like some of these people want to get like these black dragons or these water monitor or lace monitors, and
That's because they
they,
see that shit and they don't realize these people are putting hours upon hours training a day with
yeah,
each animal. Otherwise, they're going to get jacked up. Or they don't see, like, they joke about it, about the scars and everything on their arms and their hands and everywhere, essentially, because of their nails. But
you
they're like, oh, it'll be okay. It'll be okay.
did you see that video? That video of that carpet python bite that the wildlife relocator did. Did you see that?
I saw
That was
part
an
of it.
8-foot snake that cut open his artery in his wrist just because it bit, and the snake not being able to rotate the guy rotated its head along with those teeth and slit his forearm open. That guy got lucky; he didn't bleed to death from a carpet python. Do you know how many species that just opened up the gate for that could do that to you? Boa constrictors, your super dwarf retics, all most Morelia, scrub pythons, obviously, and just all these species that can do this to you. And it's like now that made me wonder if I got to the point where I might need someone that's part time, do you let them take? Because me or you might know, but will they know, like
Oh,
how that animal is?
that's
If
the
that animal,
secondary. Yeah, that's
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like, those
that
animals
scares
aren't
me.
right for anybody. Half of the
Yeah,
animals that any of us try to keep aren't right for anybody. And if it's something that could require a second person, you have to suck it up as the owner of that animal, as bad as that sounds. Like, yes, you want to pass the information on, but I don't think that helper should ever be the one handling. You
yeah,
should be the one handling, and they should be the rescue only if needed. And you're
yeah,
passing the information on because they're not going to react the same way you do.
yeah. So I mean, in a way, though, I can almost see. I don't think it's a total excuse, but I can almost see why some people might be nervous getting into certain species for that reason. But like I said, that was kind of one of those. I think that was a maybe not a one in a million, but that was. I could tell you in all the years I've kept snakes, and I've never seen anything like that. But at least not with
Mm,
a carpet python. I've seen it
right.
with retic, like big retics that were,
Where they
you
like
know,
press their nose and rub it, and they just
well, big retics being able to cut open your arm,
yeah,
your leg, or something. But I've never would never have thought a carpet python. Like I thought the guy was full of shit when I first saw it. I was like, "There's no way." Maybe a king horneye did that or something. The huge scrub python in Australia, but there ain't no way a carpet. And then I saw it and I go, "Yep, sure as shit, it was a carpet python."
hmm,
But like I said, that was one of those. I think it was a one in a million. I don't think it's something like Dave having all those boa constrictors he has. I don't think it's necessarily something that you need to worry about, but it's just it's in the back of your head, like
yeah.
that could happen.
Well,
But
we take it for granted too that, like, these, as much as we're around these animals, these aren't domesticated animals. They're
yeah,
still
yeah, and I don't think
still
in our
wild animals to the core. Like,
I
it
don't
is
think they
what it is.
ever will be domesticated. Like
Mm,
there might be a type of domestication where they're just easier to breed. Like people just, I don't domestication isn't just a hard fast rule like a dog or
right.
something. It's very species dependent. Like we were talking about earlier with cats. Cats are not a they're a solitary animal. They don't really depend on us like a pack animal would, you
Right.
know? Like or or herd animal, nothing like that. But like a snake's never gonna look at. They might look at it as like just feel. It's weird saying comfortable, but more chill around it. Well, clearly chill because I think ball
I think it's
pythons.
yeah, go ahead.
Because
I'm sorry.
ball pythons. I don't know if you ever watched that Dave and Tracy Barker ball python video they had back in 2001. They had this video of the original burgundy albino, the ultra male, and it was all balled up, and this thing was straight out of the wild as an adult. And this thing stayed in a ball. Like this thing did not move with all these ball pythons, these other captive bred ones, all over it. Did not move from that ball. So you can see that kind of domestication. But
Right.
I don't. It's not going to be like your snake's going to come to you or be able to, live in like North American weather or something like not that kind of
Right. But I
domestication
think
or
it's
evolution.
like the way we've looked at it now, it's more of like a scent base and how defensive is this animal now.
Yeah,
It's because like you could tell the ones that I've had for a long time versus the ones that I've just brought in. And they don't necessarily ball up. Even the ones that aren't ball pythons, they're all fairly comfortable. But you could tell the ones that I've had for a long time, they're used to my scent. When I come in the room and they could smell me, they know a couple of things are going on. So you could see the little noses freaking poking at the tubs and showing that they're hungry or like just trying to figure out what's going on because I'm always in here for specific reasons, right? Like I don't overly like I handle them because I want them to be somewhat calmer when I sell them, but outside of that, it's not okay. I'm That's gonna sound bad. I'm not divulging all this time to my snakes because I have kids,
yeah,
I have dogs, I have a wife that I have to appease.
yeah,
Like I have a lot
yeah.
of things in life, right? But
I don't truly think I don't the whole
yeah,
ball python or no snakes in general. Like they might be okay with you messing with them, but I don't think
yeah,
it's like ball pythons. You can never touch a ball like a captive ball python, and it'll grow up to be fine. I've yet outside of during the breeding season when a female's going through a feeding or a male too, but when a female's going through that feed cycle where they're vigorously feeding, that's the only time I've noticed where yeah, you might take a bite. But
right.
generally speaking, I shoot ball pythons. I will
Definitely.
say I've got one of my worst bites from a ball python as far as well, most painful bite. I remember years ago, Ben and his wife at the time went to where'd they go? Somewhere down in Costa Rica. I don't know, Mexico. I don't remember. They went out. They went somewhere, so they needed somewhere to take care of their collection. And I went out there to clean, just kind of to clean a little bit and just make sure all the tubs are closed. Nothing's going to escape. Because Ben would, every once in a while, Ben would have a scenario where one snake would escape and release 8 other
A bunch of
ones.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, or whatever. But I went there to clean a little bit. Well, he had there was a ball python I was cleaning, and you'd hold it while you spot clean its tub. Well, while I was holding it, like the snake was striking while I opened the tub, like it was trying to get something. But usually, once you grab them, it diffuses that food response with ball
Right.
pythons, anyways. Well, not this ball python. This ball python was still out to get something. So it latched onto the back of my hand where all these veins are and just bit down right on there. And boy, I could not get that snake off like that because it's just the skin's so soft. I just, you couldn't like push up against it, and I just couldn't get the sucker off. And I was like, I was on there for like 10 or 15 minutes, and that hurt so bad.
Mm.
I was talk about it's gonna sound bad, but I was almost like, man, I'm gonna take you out if you don't get off my hand. Like I'm gonna just, you know, and then end it right now
It's
if you
one of
don't
those,
get off my.
yeah. It's one of those reaction moments. Like I was saying with
Oh,
Grumpy, like not that I could have done anything to it, but it was one of those. It was like it's my life or yours at this point, bro. Like I'm
oh
sorry,
yeah, yeah.
but no,
It was
it's a
painful.
reaction thing, man. Like it sucks to say with animals, but it's a reaction thing. With us, we've been going at it. We went on so many rants and
I told you,
through
man.
it,
I can
bro.
go.
Um, let's talk about your projects this year and like some of the stuff you're doing. Like, obviously, we talked about the white lips, which I love. I'm super excited to get into. Um, this big, beautiful girl right here, and it's how how do you how do you keep so many different species and stay focused on the breeding habits? Like I know you said it's not very different based on pythons, but like honestly, I feel like there has to be maybe you're right, like you were saying earlier. Maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on it and it's not that difficult, but I don't know. It's the newbie
It's
in me, man. I feel like
it's
you have to have a change.
so. there's a few things. So cycle feeding, one of the biggest things when it comes to breeding every species, and I'm talking even humans. We're pretty domesticated, but if we were more, you know, people will not people, but animals will breed depending on the seasons. And it's
Right.
not cold, it's not hot. Well, sometimes hot. Hot can really put a damper on things.
That
But
cold season's a killer for
but
me. I'm just saying, my kids were
oh
pretty much all born in the spring. So
man,
once
you're a
it
man.
starts getting cold, I know it's
Oh
cuddle
I'm
time,
I'm
man. It's cuddle time when it's cold.
I'm a big guy, so that's when it's the safest for me. But anyways, like most of these animals, food cycling is a huge thing. And the problem is, and you can do this with ball pythons. I hate here's a reality check. You can seasonally breed ball pythons.
Right.
People think, oh, they don't breed seasonally. Well, how do you feed them? Oh, weekly, bi-weekly. That's not cycle feeding. When I mean cycle feeding, I mean you may not feed them for 4 months. Like I'm talking like you don't feed them till they show you they're hungry. Like with a ball
Right.
python, obviously other species will always be hungry, but you kind of have to set that boundaries. So there was a paper, not a paper, it was a Daniel Natouche. He's a biologist. He studies a lot of the Indonesian pythons. Like he did the paper on the chondros when he separated the chondros out. And they were asking, this was on NPR, and they were asking him about follicle growth in pythons. Well, he didn't know a lot about the breeding aspect of it because that's not his forte. It's more of just like the either well, a bunch of other things other than breeding. But he dissected a bunch of different snakes, a bunch of different pythons, like reticulated pythons, green trees, uh, uh think berms and stuff too. Stuff, all kinds of species and thousands of them. And the one common denominator he found in a lot of them, or all of them, was they all had follicles year round. They don't, a lot of people think they just shrivel up and go away. No, they're always there, but there's just something that needs to trigger them to
There's something
grow.
that stimulates the growth,
So
right?
food can be a big, big thing for a lot of these animals. A lot of these animals, they in the wild they'll go through seasonal fasts where they may hardly get anything, and then whenever it's breeding season for other animals, a lot of times, all right, that or rainy season, more animals either come out or it's a lot of other animals are procreating.
Right.
So, and then that's when they're going to eat the most. So a ball python, like, well, bringing it back to ball pythons can be seasonal or seasonally bred. The only thing is, and this is the caveat, and I've noticed this with mine, I didn't do seasonal feeding in the beginning. So a lot of my older adults are harder to get on a routine compared to babies because I'll seasonally feed from the time they're established, which could be less than a year old, maybe 6 months, and I'll seasonally feed them all the way up to adulthood.
Right.
And that blows people's mind. He's like, you don't feed babies for months? I go, yeah, because some babies may not get to eat all that often. And I tell you what, like when they do get to eat, they grow and they eat like I usually never have a problem getting a lot of them started. But the problem is, and this is where I think people need to watch out. If I tell them don't feed them for months, but you got to watch them too, because it's not a hard
You have to
fast rule
watch
for
that body
everything.
weight. Yeah.
Some of the species may not take it that well, and some of them might lose weight a little quick. But you got to be able to distinguish what's an unhealthy looking animal and what's an animal that looks fine. And the problem is with Americans, if it's not round, then it
Everything.
doesn't look
Every,
healthy.
yeah.
So it's like we want to feed, 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 feed. And like I said, weekly, bi-weekly feeding is not seasonally feeding. I'm telling, like Vin Russo, and this is going to blow people's minds, feeds 12 times a year his ball pythons. He'll feed them really big meals, but for a short period of time. And and that's what I tend to do. This year I had a real rat shortage, right? I couldn't get my dad breeds a lot of the rodents. So he's retiring this year. So he had a lot of surgery done. So the rats he didn't cycle through a bunch of them. So we like had a rough season with rats. So I had to prioritize, okay, how can I feed these snakes and still get them to breed? So I was just like, well, I'm going to give them one big meal bi-weekly and feed them this for a little while and then not feed them for months, because people think that ball pythons, oh, they shouldn't be fed these huge meals. Yeah, if you're going to feed them weekly or bi-weekly. But if you're only feeding them a handful of times throughout the year, then you can feed them some big rats. I got another, there's a, this is another thing too. People keep talking about these ASFs and stuff. Dude, there's these African pouch rats that they use to smell out like landmines.
Mm-hmm.
They're a part of the ball python's food source too. Do you know how big those are? They're bigger than a jumbo rat.
Damn.
They can, and they eat them. They go in the burrows. They may not eat, they might have trouble. Well, pythons in general cannot gauge. Like, that's why I always laugh when you hear that, like, oh, the snake's sizing you up.
Shit.
Dude,
Yeah.
snakes will eat whatever. Like, snakes will, they will try, they don't care what it is, they'll eat it. If it's bigger than them, the same size as them, they may not be able to do it, or they die from it, because if a snake eats something its own size, that's just way too much overload for the heart and the organs and all that. So it's like a heart attack. They essentially, it's what it's doing. It's just fucking everything just fails. So, or a stroke. It's kind of, or a stroke or a heart attack, something like that. But if you, because and I would say there was a guy in one of the Papuan Python Facebook groups who had a male and a female, and those are known snake eaters, and they were roughly the same size. And this is why I'm one of those guys, like, I will keep my males small. Like, if I showed you some of my breeding ball pythons, you would be shocked to hear how old they are and how small they are. Like, I just keep.
Are you talking about like the 500 to 700 gram range, or what are we talking about when you say small?
Like 300 to 400 at an adult size. Like, so I had a pair of double head candy puzzles, and obviously the males had to wait for the females, and I maintenance fed it's basically whenever I remembered to feed them, I would feed them. So that's the only time they would eat. And people think they may not get monstrous, but it's not going to stun them to where they can't get big. Trust me, if you fed the shit out of them, they could get just as big as they would have if you didn't. But I just slow down, because there's just no reason in most cases to have a male really, really big. The only caveat to that is if you are a guy with an ultrasound and you're breeding it to like 10 to 15 or 20 females, then that's a 200 or 300 or 300 to 400 gram snake is going to have a real rough time doing that and live, essentially. Even like a 500 or 600, 700 gram male will have trouble. That's when you're going to want something a little bit bigger. But like smaller males, if they're just getting, like usually my first year males are probably around that 400 gram mark roughly, and like I said, high threes, mid fours, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. It's essentially whatever I have in rat wise to feed them. So, and I don't pay attention to the weights either. So I could be either lowballing.
You could be lowballing that, yeah.
So they might be, but they're small. Like, people wouldn't believe me if I told them that if I held it in my hand, but like, I don't know. If you get them big too, this is another thing, is if you get them big,
lazy.
they're not just lazy, but you have to put them in a bigger enclosure. Like, or you don't have to, but then you got an animal that's just jammed into a tiny tub.
Right.
But if it's smaller, well, it has a whole lot more room. It's just why waste the space on a huge male? Now, if you buy the male and he's huge, that's one thing. And like I said, if you plan on breeding it to a gazillion females, then yes, it probably would be beneficial to have a bigger male, because a small male, I really don't think it'd be able to handle. I remember Ben would have 700 gram males, maybe 800, and they would go through a ton of females, and sometimes he would have them crash, and sometimes they'd end up dying because it was just too much work overload. So yeah, it just depends.
I think that's a happy medium that we have to find as breeders too, though, is like,
yeah,
It's not just based on weight. It's knowing when to pull that male.
I could tell you, man, I don't pay attention to weight at all anymore with shit, anything. Ball pythons. That's another thing too. You ball python people get into other species, you'll get laughed at if you ask about a weight. Nobody gives a shit about a weight. It's age rules over weight most of the time. You know, if if you're breeding stuff too young, you could possibly run into longevity issues. But in some cases, but like if you're talking like weight, I mean, weight can mean. I mean, people would be shocked to see how small some of my two breeder male white lips are. They're just they're probably about the size of my spotted pythons. Like they're really not that big.
Mm.
They're fucking. They are pretty tiny animals. Like honestly,
It's
if
almost
they
like a
just
colubrid size for you, huh?
it's yeah, I probably somewhere in there. But I mean, if let's just say if the female decided to eat the male, I would never notice, other than him just not being in there. There wouldn't be any lump. And to be
Mm.
honest, like this sounds bad, I would rather have the female eat the male than the female eat the male that's the same size, regurgitate it, and die. And now I'm out two different animals than just the
'Cause
one. Personally,
I didn't know that was a thing.
yeah,
White
it
lips
depends.
are
They don't eat each other, but they Ryan always said they didn't. He never experienced any kind of aggression with each other. I, for the most part, didn't. There was only one female I had who would like if if you went into the tub while the two were together and she was real antsy, she would wrap the male just out of I don't know, just being startled by him or movement. And I've had that happen before. But generally speaking, I don't. It's not usually
so
that
that
bad.
that needs to be like a witness first interaction or
Yeah.
what's it called? Meet. Oh God, you know what I'm trying to say. It starts with an M. I don't know what it's called. It's like when a divorced couple is spending time with their child. Mediated. Boom.
Oh.
Mediated interaction. That's bad. That's bad that's where I went for that. Sorry, people.
Yeah. Oh
Dark
God.
minds over here. But talk about let's talk about going into this because Morelia can some of them can get fairly large, but they start out like super tiny like worms.
Oh yeah.
What's kind of your interaction with breeding these and how have you had to set up differently? Because like most people that I know, they remain within like they'll have a housing for the adults, right? But they'll maintain like their ball python setup. And some of them use like the 6 quarts and stuff like this, where there's enough of a gap that you could actually get a baby out of it. Or if you make breather holes in it, they're gonna sneak through the breather holes. So you got to think about how you're gonna maintain that gap. I know some people that use colubrid racks, but how have you changed the way you do things in order to breed stuff that has that such a big variance in size?
As far as like housing them or
Yeah.
would or and
So like housing from
adults
baby
to
to
babies.
adulthood, and then like what's something or like what's been your focus with growing those up? Because Morelia seems like it's a little bit longer, almost like a retic where you're looking at like that 4 to 5 year before you're really breeding with some of the species as well, from what I've found.
They some species are, but I mean even like I said, I've experienced it in a few like ball pythons. I have ball pythons that'll breed 2 years old, and I'll have some that'll breed 6 years old. Like it depends. It's very species dependent. Like the bredli you have there, they
Mhm.
tend to be an animal that tends to need to be older, from my experience. But I've had them. I try to cool them down and do the whole cooling process with them because they come from part of Australia where they experience wide temperature ranges. You know, similar to like diamond pythons and stuff. But maybe not quite as extreme, but they can handle some pretty crazy temperature swings. But as far as keeping them, I don't really. So as of now, I keep them all in boa tubs, like the big ARS boa tubs but I'm trying to change that into caging because I kind of feel guilty keeping them where they can't perch, even though
Right.
I don't think, at least the carpet pythons, I don't think most of them care. But I don't, other than the Darwins, I can tell the Darwins tend to be a lot more hanging up on like the lay box tub and stuff. So I plan on, I, I think later on this year, into next year, I'm getting a building put up. It's a decent sized building, like 2,000 square feet. And I plan on having multiple different rooms. And there's going to be a ball python room, a carpet room, and a few other rooms. Well, carpet room's going to be a lot of the miscellaneous stuff,
Right.
but it's going to have a lot of the carpets, all the bulk of the carpets in there. And I plan on putting a wall of cages for at least the females. Like I said, I keep my males so small that tubs aren't that bad. To me, they're not too bad of a thing because they have plenty of room in a lot of them, especially if you add those like 3D perches and stuff. So you add
Mhm.
more elevation and different, floor, expand on the floor space essentially. But the females, I'm going to try to move them, the bulk of them, into enclosures. Try to,
Right.
and we'll see. Hopefully, it doesn't screw things up. But some of them, like Darwins, I cannot. My Darwins are plenty old enough to breed, but man, they have like no interest in each other. They just stare at each other, and that's about all I can get with them. But a lot of the other ones, they do fine in tubs. And like I said, Nick Mutton, he's the king of the carpets, and he breeds a lot of his in tubs too. And they don't seem to have a problem as far as being in tubs. But generally speaking, if you're gonna like, I I have a decent number of carpets, not nothing like Nick, obviously, but I have a decent number, and I think I can convert a lot of them into cages, and that's just kind of the route I want to go with a lot of them. I don't. I just think it's more of a guilt thing with them. Not to mention, I kind of want to see them a little bit too, like hanging out on perches because they are just such a great display animal when it comes to perching. Like they're not afraid of anything, so they'll hang out and sit on a perch I think more impressively than a chondro will, but that's surely because of size. Carpets being just so much bigger, they just look more impressive on a branch than a chondro does, generally speaking. And if they want to, sometimes they will hide. But yeah, I don't keep and then I start them out in smaller tubs and than my ball python tubs I use. Like I use the V18 tubs, not
Okay.
V18s, the V 15s, the little shorter ones, a little short. I use the Freedom Breeder. I don't even know what the Freedom Breeder versions of them are called, but I
FB
fives is it
fives. Yeah.
something?
FB
Yeah,
fives.
I like them for. Yeah, I know you can get different colors in the Vision tubs, but I kind of like that they're already pre-hold punch, and I just buy the Freedom Breeder solid colored ones because that's another thing too. Is I think with a lot of the smaller neonates, when they're real small like that, they kind of it's more they're it's not as much security as more like a attention span. Like with the white lips, I've heard too they can have attention span issues. Like with babies, like kill something and then leave it because they saw something else move and
Right.
forget to go back to eat it. So that's kind of why with certain species, I kind of would keep the darker tubs for depending, or you can keep them all in dark tubs. It really doesn't. Probably what even with ball pythons, it doesn't
That was one
matter.
of the
But
things. Well, that's why I have gray. Like I have the clears on this because that's what it came with, and I love the sea serpents. I'm not gonna shit on it, but
oh
I
yeah,
prefer the grays that you can't see. And then when I bought the ARS rack, my wife was like, "Well, I want the clear tubs." I was like, "I don't want clear tubs." And she's like, "What do you mean? I want to be able to watch them." I was like, "No, I want to throw the rat in there, and I want them to eat, and I want them to be left alone." And it was an argument for a little bit because you're dropping that kind of money on something. She's like, "Well, I want to be able to see the snakes." It's like, "Well, open the tub."
yeah, right. Oh man, Yeah,
But no, I
I,
completely get it.
I,
They're not the most cued in animals.
yeah, well, ball pythons. I keep ball pythons in the vision tubs because they don't have the freedom. Because I do, you know, like when it comes to rack system, even caging, I am a die-hard animal plastic guy, and I know most people don't like animal plastics for obvious reasons. But dude, I am like loyal to a default. Like unless you just take my money, I'll wait however within I guess reason could be different to different people, but I I can wait a while for some caging or racks, or at least I
Right.
most of the time I can. And it's just one of those like once I'm set with someone, there's like an old quote from Ralph Davis I always like is I like buying stuff from people to help me sleep better at night. And that's kind of one of those. Not saying I wouldn't with anyone else, but I'm like I said, just loyal. I just like sticking with when I get that
Well, it's tested,
whatever
yeah.
brand, I like it. I just want to stick with it. I do have ARS racks though, because I mean certain species I think just in my opinion do a little bit better in tubs personally. At least as far as like not having like the white lips. I think white lips are
Right.
just one that, if they're not having to bang their the only problem I found with the ARS tubs, at least when you have to get the bigger tubs, they don't have that. I don't know if they do now because I've had the rack I have now for a while, but it didn't have ventilation choices. So that they would have terrible sheds in those big boa tubs. And so uh I had to find something to cover the top with because it just released too much humidity. So I had to get some kind of
Hmm.
plastic to lay over it to keep the moisture and humidity in them better. So
It's funny. Well, it's not funny, but I think it's funny you say that because that was one of the things. Like, I could have swore I had selected when I bought this a different ventilation, and then I went back on the website and was looking at, okay, well, let's look through the options just in case I want to add a couple more levels. Like, I don't see anything for ventilation, and maybe it was just something that I overskipped. I'm not saying ARS doesn't provide it, but it may have
I
been
thought
something
they
I
did. I
overskipped.
thought they did now, but I don't, I don't know. I don't
I'm
really
I'm pretty sure they do on
the
the
hybrids or something.
originals. I'm not sure if they do on the hybrids because I
Oh,
have a
okay,
hybrid.
okay,
Maybe
okay,
that's what it is. But like I know when I switched to this, I'm having to go back now and I'm flipping all the ventilation so it's over the heat
okay.
because it was holding too much humidity and it was actually getting to where water was rolling down the sides just with a water dish. So it was a little weird for me, and it's been play and go, which I mean that's the way all your equipment's going to be. Like it was almost to the point where I was about to take a drill to it and just like start randomly drilling in each
Oh
spot.
God.
Like no,
Oh man.
yeah, man,
Yeah.
you got to do what you got to do for the animals. Like
Oh yeah.
I was getting some RI issues with my gravid females because there was too much humidity in their tubs.
Oh
So I was just like, no, is
yeah.
what it is.
My problem was keeping humidity. Like with the white lips, I had the female that laid eggs too. This is gonna sound bad, but she would while she was going through the process of building follicles, I noticed she would shed and she had eye caps on. And boy, having to manhandle an adult female white lip to get those suckers off is such a pain in the ass. So what I did was this is why I had the ventilation was such a problem, too much of it, and I had the thing on it. Well, I was like, not gonna lie, I was like, I'm just gonna coast this and see if maybe she'll rub them off or she'll have another shed and pop them off. Well, she ended up not getting them off that second time, but at that point, she already had her the ovulation, their prelay shed. I mean, so and I was like, shit, if she has eggs, I really don't want to mess with her
Right.
because you're not just gonna a white lip. You gotta hold on to like restrain with some strength, and you know how they get when you do that. You start wrapping you up and stuff, and then you got to fiddle with their face. I go, man, I just don't want to do that if she has eggs. And I go, man, I'm gonna have to let this coast a little while, and then once she lays, take her off, and then, you know, then mess with it. So I had to wait. I had to wait a while, and I go, it's like this is such a pain in the ass. So that's why I had to jerry rig those racks to make them work. least for that, you know. That's really the only problem I have is animals that need more moisture like that. They tend to ARS racks, and I guess freedom breeder would work if you have the better ventilation or the less ventilation on the tops. But yeah, ventilation is really the only thing maybe different with species, depending on the species. But I think that has more to do with heat more than anything.
Right.
Like if you're gonna run a hot spot, you're gonna run into the bad shed problems. If you can do an ambient, I've heard that can fix a lot of that shed problems because we are giving the animals more heat than they actually need to function. Like they don't need this goes for all species too. They don't.
Right.
Maybe Antaresia might be a little different. I heard they tend to like hotter hot spots, but generally speaking, like even ball pythons. Like I have ball pythons that from the top rack could be 88 and the bottom one could be what is it 85, 84, and they tend to be okay.
Right.
So I personally
I
never had
get
a
that.
problem with them.
Is
So
there any difference with an incubation besides just like incubation times, or do you have to set up like different incubators based off of the species? Or
nah, they all incubate pretty similar to each other. I talked to Ryan. Ryan goes, I don't really treat. I mean, maybe you want to keep if you want to keep a certain species on the bottom and more like I don't know what was it chondros or what did he tell me? I'm drawing a blank. It was like chondros, carpets, and maybe something else. You keep towards the bottom, and your balls, um, Antaresia, and a lot of other species more up top. I never had a problem. I just kind of throw them all in there and just never really had an issue with it. You know, as far as temperature ranges go or anything. That's like I said. I think people just put way too much thought into different species. Now, if you're doing like a water monitor and a ball python, it might be a little different because they're not, outside of being, you know, reptile, there's not much similarities between the two. But if you're
right.
doing like pythons where they evolved from essentially a common ancestor, relatively recent too, not well, kind of recent compared to squamates being the lizards and snakes, but it's just it's crazy, and them being equatorial too, them being towards, being in that line to where they can handle a lot of very similar temperatures as
Right.
far as all that's concerned. So yeah, that's why I think just people put too much thought in a lot of that stuff. It's just, you know, don't overcomplicate it on yourself. If you overcomplicate it on yourself, you're just gonna that's when you start screwing things up. When you start thinking too much about it and messing with them too much. And, another thing Nick and Ryan taught me is consistency. Be consistent. It really doesn't, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but as long as you're consistent with those ways, that'll be your best way to make something happen, or
Right.
be having a better chance of it happening.
So when
Because
you
too many,
decide to do something based off of however you decide to just stick with it and find a way
so,
to make it work, is
so
what you're saying? Or
for the most part. You can do so I'll tell you what, I did something a little different. So I'm so this it sounds bad, but I did do something a little different. And this had to do with the way the two guys I mentioned a lot is Nick and Ryan. They do things kind of differently. Well, I did a lot of business with Nick, and I talked to Nick first, so I would listen to Nick, tell me the way he bred because he not quite as many species as Ryan, but still a shitload of different species. So he has some valid points. So I would ask him, so how do you go about? So I'd say like cycle feeding. How did you do this? How do you do your cycle feeding? Well, I would sparsely feed throughout summer, feed heavy through fall, and then not feed at all during winter, and then pick food back up again in spring. And I was like, okay. And sounds like majority of the Morelia complex does that, and that seems to work very well with a lot of species. Well, I asked Ryan because Ryan, I'm not gonna lie, he's the king of the hill when it comes to pythons. When it comes like there's nobody doing what he's doing, and he's proven it over and over again. He has what it takes to breed pretty much seems like any kind of python. So, oh, Ryan Young, yeah, he he um he did it differently. He told me I don't feed at all during summer, feed heavy in fall, and still feed throughout winter. And I go, and then that's kind of one of those situations where who's
Who's
like I said,
right?
I'm not
Who's
taking.
wrong? What's
Well, it's
ethical?
almost like which one do you want to try? And
Mhm.
it kind of was like, well, nothing against Nick, but Ryan just killing it. So clearly, there's something he's doing, and so, and then there's a bunch of factors that go into that, right? So Nick uses hot spots. Ryan does ambient temperatures. When you do ambient temperatures, you cannot feed that big of meals.
Right.
You got to feed, you can feed more often, but you feed smaller meals. So you might feed every 4 or 5 days or something like that, or, a smaller meal than you would, uh, if you had a hotspot. Like me, I do hotspots because Brian has a more controlled room that he can do an ambient temperature and it'd be a little better consistent than my room is. So I kind of have to do the hotspot mentality, use a hotspot.
Right.
It may not bump it up to anything too crazy, but just to give enough because that room will get kind of cold because I do have, some of the carpets can take a little bit harder temperature swings for the most part. So, and when that happens is I try to feed smaller meals than during winter because if I'm feeding big meals, which is what I do in the fall to try to bulk them up, because that's another thing too, is when you hear about this cycle feeding, look at the breeders who do it and look at the condition of their animals when they do it. Like if you look at your animal and you're saying, all right, I'm doing it the way they're doing it, but my snake still looks thin. Well, then it could breed. I've had snakes that look a little bit on the thinner side still breed, they just may not lay that big of a clutch.
Right.
But someone like Nick would post a lot of his adult female breeder carpets he's going to breed, and you look at him and you go, they look kind of thick, like they're thick, and they go how. A lot of people would go, then how do you do it with giving them months off and not feeding them? Well,
It's a fat
that's when
storage
that's
already built
well,
up.
yeah. If you feed them up in like increments during a segment of the year, you they hold they tend to almost like a better shape to them when they're not being fed all the time. And when I mean all the time, I mean weekly and bi-weekly feeding. It's like I feel like I got to repeat myself with that because some people they don't I don't know, they think I don't know, I had to put my other headphone in and died.
Oh, I got you.
Fucking
We
lost
died.
my train of thought. Yeah. And yeah,
It,
just people
yeah, man.
go
It's
go
like what
ahead.
I talked to Dave about because we talked about the cyclic feeding or like doing a fasting period, and I asked him what he did, and then I told him what I do. So like over here, all the females that I plan on breeding, I'm not gonna lie, I do a weekly feeding. I do a small weekly feeding every week because that's what my mentor said. Okay, do a small
It's
meal,
hard to
do
not
it weekly. But
yeah.
then the month and a half before I decide to start creating that breeding cycle for them, they don't get anything for a month and a half.
Yeah.
And then they start on small feedings again. And then they might get one or two per week of small feedings. But I keep the animals small either way now. Initially, when I first started and I didn't really have luck my first year. Like I only paired a couple, but I didn't get any clutches. So now I don't even really consider it my first year, but because I didn't produce anything. But whatever. The first time I paired, I went from the fasting period to immediately mediums. And I think it was too much of a shock on their bodies. They weren't really taking in the way they needed to. So I started with smalls and I just stick with smalls. Um, but that's my thought and based off of what I've seen, it's been effective for me. Like I said,
You'll
it doesn't mean it's going to be effective for everyone, but that's just my mentality.
you'll learn to adapt in certain situations. Like this year when I was telling you I had such a rat shortage. So with this rat shortage, I couldn't feed nearly as much as I usually would. So I
Mhm.
had to start I really had to like think, all right, when should I start feeding some of these females? Because I had a bunch of first time females, ball python wise. Because the ball pythons are the only things that I feed live too. All pretty much everything else I have species wise will eat frozen thawed. But I would let the female tell me when she was hungry, that's when I would feed her. And that's when I would feed her those giant rats, like those big rats that I wouldn't, so I could coast too. I would feed her those meals. And do when you feed them big meals, do not feed them like back to back. Like don't feed them the following
Right.
week. Let them digest that rat for at least 2 weeks, at least. Because and I know Warren Booths has been on a bunch of podcasts. He's gone over it. If you feed them everything, their heart doubles in size, their organs grow, their plasma thickens. And I look at it like this: if I follow a lot of these bodybuild, I don't follow them, but I hear about it because they're still kind of a part of the lifting community, I guess you'd
Right.
say. And a lot of them are dying.
They're
And they
dying
do that.
super
Well, they're
young.
dying. They're dying because they're taking these growth hormones, and their organs are like 2 to 3 times the size they should be, because that's a lot of stress on their body. People like that could lead me down another topic. Like when people look at me, they think like, God, you're so healthy. I go, I'm big, but my heart works as much as a fat ass that weighs the same. It actually works harder because the muscle and everything. So I can do cooler things than the fat ass who sits on the couch, but it's still not, and I know it's not healthy, but it's an addiction, just like the reptiles,
Right.
getting stronger. So it's one of those, it's the same thing I think that's why people like who breed ball pythons and they feed them all the time. And every once in a while, you hear about those like animals that ate something, regurgitated, and died. I think they just heart attack. I think it just if you consistently keep them elevated like that with no breaks, I think that's what's killing them. I think they're just dying from a heart, just like these bodybuilders. You're taking all these growth hormones. Your body can only handle it so much before you're done.
Right.
You end the you know burn yourself out that too quick. So
So someone had an interesting subject, and I was actually going to say it, so I'm glad they kind of said it. But what's your thought on not feeding them again until they poop? And if they leave a large black stool, does that mean that you're overfeeding them?
I don't think so much. I think it's the size of the poop more than anything. Like if they're you can tell when they're utilizing a food source better by the size of their poop. It's like same thing with
Right.
I noticed it with
It's like
me.
us. Yeah.
Like when I
We
went on this
grapple
diet,
up.
when I oh dude, when I was up to 280 at one point and I wasn't getting any stronger and I was like, I'm not going to keep all this weight on if I'm not going to get stronger. So I decided to cut weight. And I cut weight and let's just put it I utilize the food better because it's a cleaner diet, but my body's utilizing the food better compared
Right.
to, same thing with the reptiles. If they're taking these huge shits, then it's just going in one hole and out the other. It's not getting everything it should be getting out of
Right.
it. So that's why
They're not
that,
absorbing it, and then you're just putting undue stress on them because you're
yeah,
just going to do the same thing next week, and they're not going to digest
yeah.
anything.
Luckily, ball pythons, for the most part, most of the time, are pretty good about just stopping when they're hit that capacity. But stuff like retics, berms, and boas, good lord, the boa community is horrible with obesity. Dude, I've seen boa constrictor tails that look like one of those little kid ring toys where it's just a different level rings on that
Oh,
you know what I'm
oh,
talking about?
yeah,
I don't know what
yeah.
that's called, but
The little
where
play
it's just all
school stack,
yeah, with
yeah.
different stacks. That's what like the vertebrae in their tail look like. I go, how does that look healthy? And the same thing with retics when their back end of their ass looks like a Nicki Minaj video. How does that look normal? I go, that looks terrible.
Cause, bro, my
everyone
anaconda
knows who
don't want none.
yeah, and everyone knows who I'm talking about when I say that too. There's a very bad guy, or not bad guy. Well, I guess some people he's bad, but a guy who's bad about doing that to his retics. And it's like I used to have this joke. People used to bitch about the chondro community. Oh, chondros, getting them to 1,000 or 1,500 grams is crazy, and it is crazy, especially an animal that should be the size of Antaresia. But I think I was always the joke where, like, dude, retic breeders say you shouldn't even bother breeding till it's at least the size of you. If you ain't the size of the owner, then why are you trying to breed it? I don't know. I just the retic community and the chondro community and the boa community. I can't forget the boa community. They're probably the worst. I'm just not into that community as much as the other two, or at least follow it. But yeah, boa people are terrible, and they'll eat too. That's the problem. Like I said, that's the problem with the one. It's not a. Hopefully, it wouldn't become a problem. But I tell people when they get other species, just do not feed them like you do your ball pythons. If you
Right.
do that, first of all, a lot of these species are triggered by cycle feeding. So if you don't give them, like I said, every week or biweekly is not a cycle feed. That's just that's a schedule still. And you're not going to trigger any kind of follicular development from doing that. I mean, well, I'm going to say you're not going to. I know some people that do feed, but chances are it's going to be a lot more sporadic,
Right.
or you just shorten that animal's life. Like it might only breed 10 years, 15 if you're lucky, compared to like Vin Russo, who does this feeding cycle with his boas, but he'll breed boas that are almost in their 30s, or at least in their 20s. When most people say, I remember years ago where there was a split in the boa community where it was like you had your breeders who bred their animals till they're 5 years old and shot shit and died because they fed the shit out of them and just bred them young and fed them till they died. And they just said, oh, well, that's the way it is. And then you had people like the Vin Russo who said, well, why would I want to keep, well, even as a business aspect, why would I want to just have to keep cycling through new animals? If you could just get longevity by waiting a little longer and keeping them healthy, well, why wouldn't you just go that route? Compared to the other route and I know big breeders who did that, who knew this and still decided to go the 5-year lifespan route and said, fuck it. It is what it is, and I go, that's a shame,
Hmm.
but I don't know.
Well, let's wind it back in. So I'm gonna ask real quick, um, what are some of the projects that you're willing to divulge that you're super excited about, or species that just have you really amped to be breeding this year? And then after that, I'll ask my last little question for you because we've taken up
Okay.
a decent amount of your time.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Yeah. Projects. Dude, there's so many, man. So many. Species wise, hopefully try to knock out other species that I haven't, that either didn't go this year or will be up to size next year. Um, I don't know. I'm going to hopefully try Timors. Going to keep trying for them. Um, what else? Rough scales, tons of different carpet stuff. Like I said, Darwin albino stuff, ivory jungle stuff, uh, all kinds of locality carpet stuff. Hopefully, what else? Oh man, I feel like there's other species I'm just not thinking of. Hopefully Angolan pythons. Hopefully try them. Um, and there's probably other ones I'm just forgetting, but try to do more species, and then the species I have already bred, like hopefully get a different pair of white lips or two different pair of white lips to go, hopefully. And as far as ball pythons go,
It's got to
that
be
one I
puzzle.
oh
Like
dude,
I
I've
know how
really
you feel about puzzle.
oh dude. So I've had to I decided when I was really on this mission to build the species collection, you just can't do all these ball python more. So like you can't just do, because like I said, after working with Ben, I was in that mindset, have all these variety of morphs, and you have a wide variety. Well, now I've changed that to variety of species, but condensing the morphs into just what do I really like working with. And it was something about the puzzle gene that just, first it was that quote big investment animal I got into, like spent a lot of money on, with money I had, worked forever to get, that. And that's another thing too. It's the impatience in this
Right.
fucking community, man. Dude, like I made $9-10 an hour at my job when I think I was 21, and when I bought the puzzle, and I worked 6 or 8 months,
Just
didn't do
pay off.
shit.
Yeah.
Well, not even paid off, just to say it, because like I wouldn't want to do a payment plan or anything. That's ridiculous. But there was like that, I was like, I'm going to save up for this gene because I really want to work with this gene. I really, really like this gene, what it does. And I was like, I'm going to save. I'm not going to go out partying. I'm not going to get the latest and greatest thing for my car, or whatever the other kids do. I never grew up like other kids. I didn't care about that kind of stuff. I was like, outside of lifting, and even lifting, I don't spend that kind of crazy money on. Uh, but I was just hard fast saving everything I can for that project. And I'd get into that project, and there was something fulfilling about having to work that hard and save that long to get a project that, I think that snake cost me $6,000,
Yeah.
and I was just like, saved everything, drove down to Daytona, met Sean Bradley, picked that snake up, you know. And I remember at the time too, is I'm one of those dudes. I don't give two shits about a deal. You know, if I'm gonna get something, I'm gonna get it. I'm not gonna. If the person wants to work a deal without me asking, that's your deal. I don't care. And if it's too expensive, I'm just not gonna buy it. But if I want it, I'm gonna save for it, regardless of the price. Whatever it is. And I had a buddy at Daytona telling me, he's like, dude, I could have got you a pastel puzzle for 5,500 rather than $6,000. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to get to know Sean Bradley, because Sean was another guy who really kind of inspired me to really, he's the one that got me obviously into the puzzle, like
Right.
intrigued by it. But he was another guy you know, I just looked up to in the industry. And I was like, I'm not going to build a relationship if I just say, oh, I'm going to go buy a cheaper animal for someone else. I go, no, I'll spend whatever it is
You're gonna put
for
me on
that,
a rant, bro.
yeah. Oh God, here we
So
go.
my friends, I love my friends, like a lot of my friends, man. And we'll go through the shows, and they're like, "Well, I think I could get them down a couple hundred." And I was like, "One, you don't know the person, or if you do, you know them by name, but you don't actually know them, right? Like, do you, if you come up to me right now, like say I'm selling animals, and you come up to me, and the first thing you do is try to pull a discount out of me or something like that. And it's not saying that I wouldn't offer it, but I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
like, if that's my first impression of you, I'll be like, all right, this is going to be a pet person for the rest of their life, because they're always looking for that deal, which I understand. That's kind of the concept for some people. But damn, like, you really want to earn someone's respect. You really want to build a name for yourself. Like, I understand, like, saving your dollars, especially in today's times. But at the end of the day, like, if I respect you, I'm gonna pay full freaking price.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
if I want to know you, I'm gonna pay full price, because I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna pick your brain. And it's not just the animal that I'm paying for at that point. I'm paying for not necessarily your friendship, but your time. Like, you
Yeah.
put years into making this animal. You put hours and hours and hours of understanding how to create this animal, and I'm going to take 15 minutes of your time and just pay you, and then try to lowball you on your animal. Or I'm
And
going to build a friendship that's going to last, and we're going to blossom throughout the years and just get better.
it comes down to even like getting in this, and this goes for both sides, species and morphs. I've seen it on both sides, where if you pay full price and you continue to do it, you know what happens? Especially if that guy's like a higher tier than you, he's going to come to you with something new, whether it's a morph or a species that he's working with, and be like, hey, I'm just releasing this, and I figure, hey, I'm going to let you know before I open it to the public. I've had that happen a few times where I got the, exclusive project species or whatever, and they let me into it because I just didn't, and I don't usually ask, hey, what kind of hot weird things do you have? It's usually they know me. They go, well, he's not a douchebag or he doesn't Jew me down. I'm gonna offer it to him and see if he wants it.
Right.
Before he lets anyone else know. Because that's I don't mind doing it to people. And see, you said pet people. I actually notice it's reverse. I notice a lot of
Really?
breeders who do it, but mostly breeders, honestly, even more so than pet people. But it is what it is, and I don't like judge people if they want a discount because I understand but it's one of those me personally, it just don't feel right, you know, to me anyways to ask for because I know how much it goes into a morph or a species to establish that animal or to make that animal,
Right.
especially if it's something you'd even you just rather keep back anyways, and then someone wants to Jew you down on you know, on your what you consider your pinnacle animal, species or morph or whatever. Yeah, yeah,
100%.
it's just a respect thing.
So here it is. You have a new person that comes up to you, says, Will, what's your one piece of advice for me as a brand new keeper, potential breeder? What are you going to tell them?
Potential breeder. Oh, don't chase fads and do what you truly like doing. And and another thing is too, know where you want to be at on the tier, right? And what I mean by tier is, do you want to be the Justin or Garrett, where you are the guy in that species? Do you want to work towards that? Do you just want to be like who would be another one like with retics, the people that he's a friend. I feel bad saying this, but Andrew Ostervados and
Mm-hmm.
like oh, I can't think of another super dwarf guy, but Eric Lee, I think, is another one. Those guys, they're Garrett. Garrett recommends them type of breeders, but I don't quite put them on the same. Well, they're just not the face of that market. Like Justin, then you got people like Bob Vu, where they're big guys and a lot of people, but they're not the face like Justin is. They're not I mean, they can be, but I think they'd rather be a little bit lower and not have because when you're on top of that mountain, you take all the hits.
Right.
Any you take
100%.
all the hate, all everything. You know, like and you got to figure out, do you want to be on that? What tier do you want to be at? And this goes, like I said, for anything. If you choose to be a morph guy, and like I said, you could take the route where you just specialize in one morph and do it really, really well and selectively breed. Or you could be someone who doesn't even worry about so much. You pick a morph you like and you just selectively breed it to make the best animals if to the pet trade. Or if it's a higher end morph and you selectively breed it for other breeders, be that guy that those individuals go to and figure out where do you want to be at on the tier too.
Right.
This probably means more so with the species more than just a morph per se, because the morphs don't really hold unless you're like I say Justin, because Justin engulfs all of ball pythons, not just clown and pies. I think most people just look at him in general for ball pythons in general. But like Garrett, just with the super door free ticks and stuff, anyone could be so like God, I did so many people in this industry could be like Ryan Young. If Ryan he wasn't so humble, I told him dude, you could be the Python guy. Like you could just be what Garrett and Justin are, but just pythons in general. But he doesn't. He just doesn't care to do it, and I don't blame him. Like I said, if you're on top of that mountain, you get hit by everybody, and I can understand why. That's why I've thought about maybe trying to take that route like Ryan, but I'm like, I may not be that. It's one of those you got to figure out if you're going to be good at doing that kind of stuff, like breeding those
Right.
like 15 or 20 different species in a season. So you kind of just figure out where you want to be and follow what you truly, truly like. Because the one other thing I notice in this industry with new ball python people is they're getting it because they want to make a quick financial gain. And I say quick because it's going to be quicker than most other species. You know, even outside of pythons, even boas and retics and maybe colubrids are the only other thing you can make it just as fast breeding wise, but maybe just not as financially as well as you can with ball pythons.
Right.
So it's one of those, just find out what you like to do and just figure out what part of the tier, if you want to be a breeder, what do you want to do? Or do you not even want to breed? Like I said, even in business, there's so many different ways you can turn something in this industry into a business. But if you're talking about breeding, yeah, I'd say find out what you want to do and do what you like. Because I
Oh,
tell you what, when you'll burn yourself out. Look at what Sean Bradley did. And this is nothing. Sean Bradley did it for a long time, and his famous quote was, "What was it? I am what was it? An economic slave to the ball python industry." And it's the one thing I really disagreed with Sean on. I go, like, dude, that's just a terrible way to look at it. Like I told him, I talked to him the other day. I go, dude, if you could have been that colubrid guy, you could have been the guy who just everyone talks about when it comes to you got a personality. Some like, some don't like, whatever you chose to do. But you could have been that colubrid guy. But he chose to do the ball python route because he saw, and I can't blame him because when you
huh.
see $50,000 to $100,000, especially when he came up, that I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
especially being
hard to
so
say no
young.
to a species when you came in and you saw guys walking around with 100K cash in their pocket
Oh
after a
yeah,
show.
yeah. Like I said, that you know that I can see that how that's appealing to people. But nowadays, for the most part, unless you're like working with these multi-recessive traits or something, it's hard to get that kind of money out of stuff now. So that's why I recommend find out what you like, research what you like,
100%.
and what you want to do in this industry. Like, what kind of impact do you want to leave on the future of this hobby? To me, I like the morphs. I'll I can't I can like I said, I could talk all day about projects. Like we didn't even talk about the puzzle. I remember
We
we
didn't
thought
even
about
get
what
into
we
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 didn't get
got
into
off
half of
topic.
this. This was a rant
But
video, y'all.
but
We're gonna
and
have a round two eventually to talk about Will's projects, but
but yeah, but like I said, you could
it was good though
lost
because it
train.
was all education, bro. Like
Well,
there's
it's
so
just
much knowledge dropped.
I just want to portray, if there's one thing I could just portray is people just do what you like doing. It's fine if
Yeah.
you watch Justin. It's
Oh yeah.
fine if you follow their page. I follow some of their Patreons because you can derive what they do and come up with your own thing. How can you take what they did and apply it to something else? Whether it's a species or even a morph, you want to specialize in a morph or whatever it is. How can you can learn from that, but just don't follow that formula unless you want to be that guy that follows the formula. I'm just someone who just, for the most part, I don't really like following, the trends of the day. And then honestly, with the way that, like, the way you can, predict or look at the market, that's the way it's always been, the trend of the day. And like I said, it can be a very dangerous prospect, especially with the ball pythons, where you start looking at them as more as objects than animals in some cases.
100%.
So just remember where these animals come from and don't forget, without those normals, you would never have had those morphs. They would have never existed. So, yeah, be more appreciative of where they come from and don't, yeah, just, and like I said, just do what you like. Cause like I said, there's so much stuff out there to do, man. Like I truly, truly don't believe most of the new people truly believe or understand how much they can do in this industry and take it and do some great things. Like like phenomenal things. Like I said, I'll blow them one more time. Just look at what Garrett did. You could do something similar to that, and he should have been the poster child for people to go, if a super dwarf could be cool, I think I can make anything
You make
cool,
anything cool.
or at least have more
It feeds
value.
off of your passion for what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Or at least,
100%.
like I said, have more value in the industry. Keep that, have that species have more value, because nobody wants something unless it's like a $10,000 snake or a really big ass reptile. Like if it's not a Bowen's python's expensive or a retic level quote unquote smart, that's a whole nother topic you can get on. But I'm not going to get on that. So it's just look at, and you know what? I'm going to shout out a group of people that really helped me along in this journey. Well, two people. Reptile Radio. They're no longer around. You can't, I don't even think you can find their podcast, which is a damn shame, because they got some real OGs in it. And Morelia Python Radio. And why I think they're important is they made a decision not to highlight ball pythons. Why is that? Because everybody else is doing it. We're highlighting species that are always thrown under the rug and people forget about. And I think that is super important. And if you're thinking about getting into stuff, just listen to stuff. MJ does it too. MJ's a newer guy to the scene, but he's still, like I said, he still hasn't there are so many weird species that I think would be great pets. And like I said,
I think he's done a great job with that, man, with how
yeah,
he's jumping from species to species. I really like
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I think, like I said, he's another one who's doing really great work. But it's just go out there and experiment more and figure out, like I said, even from a business aspect of it, dude, you can do so much more than just breed the next triple or quad recessives because Ozzy and Justin told you to do it, and that's fine if you want to do it, because I'm doing it too, just not doing it with clowns and pies, you know. And I got in on the puzzle right around the beginning, so it's kind of, I have that kind of army, I guess you'd say, to be able to do that kind of stuff and the time span to do it. But like I said, you could do all kinds of stuff, man. I just can't stress it enough. All kinds. Sorry, I feel like I have to
You're good,
elaborate on
brother.
this,
You're good.
because the
How do
problem
we?
is, unless I'm Justin or I'm Ozzy, this is what I think most of the people are going to do. It's just, oh well, like doesn't matter to me. I'm not saying anyone's. It's just they're not going to value what you say unless you're a big YouTuber. Like I said, there's some great books out there with even better people. Well, I won't say better people, but just as knowledgeable, and we're just as successful at one point in time in books. So read books too.
Probably more successful in most cases.
Well, I
Because
guess it depends on your
YouTubers become
success.
a fad.
Well, and I guess it depends on your success. Do you want to be success successfully financial wise, or successful mentally wise, or
Right.
fulfilled,
100%.
and your experiences in life, because God damn it. All right, I'll let you
No,
close it out without
no,
you
no more.
sure, because this is going to be another rant. So another problem, God damn, I'm roasting ball pythons today, and I keep mostly ball pythons for the most, as far as the larger side of stuff. But you know what I've never heard a ball python person say
What?
ever? Dave Kaufman's the only one. I would love to go to Africa and actually see these things in the wild. Dude, unless it's too dangerous to go, every other species keeper I know at least try to go see that species in the wild. And it's just, I'm at that point now in life. I love reptile shows. I like hanging out with you guys. But dude, I want to travel to see more of this shit in the wild. Just
I
as much,
think.
just
Go
because,
ahead.
who's going to have a better perspective on an animal and how it survives and how it looks, or should look, than someone who's experienced and seen enough of these in the wild. We're
That's
just
the lost
basing everything
love,
off of
bro.
people
Like
who,
we're taking in information, but that's the lost love. Like those people that are regular herpers I give a lot of love to on this
Oh
podcast
yeah.
because they're out there and they're getting dirty and they're like getting bit by wild animals and dealing with all the crap out there and all the bugs that I mean I go herping, but not to the extent that a lot of these people do. And
Oh dude.
they're taking temperature measurements and like humidity measurements and all this shit. And we're like,
And
oh,
dude,
we want to keep this, but let's throw it in a tub. But we're breeders. Yay. Go out there
but
in the wild and fucking figure out
it's
how to
so
actually keep them, what they
dude.
move around in, what they search in, like what's their
I,
actual environment, you lazy
oh yeah.
motherfuckers.
Dude, and the problem and
Okay, I'm
another
done.
it's
Okay.
just like I I've always been the guy when I go on a vacation, if I'm going to go travel, I like if your life's not endangered a little bit, are you really going to have that good of stories? Probably not. Because I don't really care to hear about how someone sat on the beach and read a novel while he was just staring off, looking occasionally out at the ocean or having a margarita or whatever, or a resort. That's cool. That's pretty, but you're doing what 90% of society does, anyways. But if your life's a little bit in danger, you're going to have a more, not just a fulfilled life if you live, but you're going to have a whole lot better stories. I tell you what, some of the reptile people I've met, the old timers that were herpers and stuff, and all the stories they had of like nearly getting bit by a rattlesnake, nearly getting bit by some, cobra, or drowning, or running into tribes, or getting lost out in the desert, or all
That's some of
kinds of
Tom's
stories.
favorite stories to tell, and people don't
Oh,
realize it,
yeah.
is when he lived with indigenous tribes.
Oh,
Some of his favorite memories.
Ari too. Ari with
Yeah.
what he's doing with Bolins. Dude, like the NPR guys, dude, they found an Owen Pelly python. That may not mean shit to anyone who's not into Australian pythons, but that is a lot of people were jealous of that. Australian keepers that can't hardly find that, and everyone else outside of Australia. That is a story you'll have the rest of your life that no one else, well, hardly anyone could share outside of you and your group of people.
Right.
And it's just,
100%.
I don't know, just live a little. I don't know, try something different. Don't, like I said, don't go with popular. Like I don't know. Like I said,
All
I can
right.
get into
Well,
so many rants.
we're going to put you into another rant if I don't cut this off. If they want to hear more of your rants or they want to buy a snake from you, brother, where do we get a hold of you?
Oh man, so it's TJW on Facebook, or TJW Exotics on Facebook, Instagram. Uh, have a website. It's a pain in the ass to update because I'm not, me and technology. It's rough, man. And I try to update it, but do what I can. And reptile show wise, I don't get to them as often as I I don't know if should or like would be the right word, but like I hit up most of the Missouri ones, especially out in St. Louis, because that's relatively close to me. And Tinley's kind of close enough where it's like, do I want to go or not? I just want to, like I said, I don't know. I'm kind of at that point where it's just rather travel more than go to reptile shows. But I want to go to shows though too, because there's still so many people in the hobby. Like I've been going to Texas for the last few times solely to meet Dave and Tracy Barker. And they're not there. And I'm like, God, I travel all the way out here and I don't see them. And I've been to Arlington back in 2015 and haven't ran in. I mean, not every time since then, but the sporadic times I have gone, I yet to see them. Well, COVID kind of ex-nayed that before, but yeah,
Right.
reptile shows I want to go visit and maybe see some of the old timers that still hang around those shows, because that's another thing too, is people don't realize some of the true old timers that still hang out around these reptile shows that most of these YouTubers just walk right
Just
by
walk
because it
by.
means
Yep.
nothing to. Dude, if you knew the history of some of those guys, you wouldn't have a Justin or Ozzy or uh, Billy or these big breeders. These you know they were the foundation of this industry back in the early days. So that's the one reason I want to should go to more shows. But yeah, St. Louis shows, you'd see me at them, and I think that's pretty much it for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Well, brother, I appreciate your time tonight. I'm going to go ahead and get this wrapping up. And if you want to hang out, I'll be in the back in a second.
All right.
Or if you want to go, that's cool too. Whatever you want to do, bro.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how do you even I don't even know how you
I got
exit
you.
out of
Got
this thing.
Oh man. All right. So much freaking information tonight. A lot of rants. I think it was good though. I think a lot of that stuff is probably things that we needed to hear in the first place as a industry. US ARC. I can't freaking stress this enough. Go give your support to US ARC. $40 for the basic membership. It's not that big. If you're willing to pay $50 for a normal ball python, which we should appreciate, just ask Will. You should be able to spend $40 on a membership to protect the rights to keep your animals. There was an alert that just came up today or yesterday, I believe, for North Carolina. So read up on that. Make sure you're putting your support in, reaching out to your representatives to show that you do not want the Lacey Act amendments to stay within the America Competes Act before they come to their final decision, which is July 4th. So it is coming quick. Again, anything that you buy under my code with VivTech, all that money goes to US ARC at the Arlington show. So if you want to support them that way, absolutely. Again, 100% of the proceeds that I get from you using my code goes to US ARC at the Arlington show. I want to thank you guys so much. Next week's going to be awesome as well. I'm not going to divulge who it's going to be, but it's going to be a great show. Everyone that supported tonight, thank you for taking your time. Love you all. We'll see you on the next